around, as he says. Okay. All right, let's get started. Hey, first of all, thank you everyone for persevering and coming together. Quick acknowledgement that we are hosting this Colloquium on the ancestral and territorial lands of the Mi'kmaq. So thank you to them. For everyone who doesn't know me, my name is Michael Hartley. I would love to say that I'm a fourth-year student here at Dalhousie University. However, we all know that's not the case. I'm going to be keeping us on track today. And so I'm right now, let's go back up. I graduated from kinesiology back in 2000 and then spent some time in oil and gas, mining, and now running a tech company, a risk management technology company that Victoria, you and I have to talk about, based in Toronto. And I know I speak for people who have made the effort to get to the Maritimes. It's a delight to be back in the Maritimes. On a personal note, being in a room full of people who are frankly not my family is an absolute joy over these past few years. So this is great. Thank you so much. Just a few quick housekeeping items. We recorded the session, so we'll have that for posterity. Now, I have asked, there are no planned drills for today. So if one does go off, then the emergency exits just on the right and at the end of the hall. So too are the washrooms. So, but they're just to the left. So depending on the nature of the emergency, you choose appropriately. If we can keep our phones off, he says, as he turns his phone off, or at least onto silent, that would be much appreciated. It's for the feedback, of course. And we've got a photographer here. Danny's in the back. Thanks, Danny, for helping us out. And there'll be another photographer in later on. By being here, you've all opted into being in photos. If you want to opt out, go speak to the photographer. Before we kind of kick on, I just want to recognize the collection of people that we have in the room and online today. It's quite extraordinary. We're first and foremost honored to have John McCabe's immediate family with us, Tim and Sean. Thank you guys so much for being here. I know John's daughter, Betsy, will be hopping on the call if she's not already. If I've missed you, Betsy, do apologize. And of course, John's very good friend, Al Scott, is here. Nice to see you, Al. And really, we pulled this together to honor the academic legacy of John McCabe. And it's so great to see really the past, the present, and the future all come together. We've got a couple other people who are going to be joining us who are here, who are going to help us with the opening remarks. Dr. Brendan Merritt, who is the Dean of Faculty of Health, and Dr. Maureen Raymond, who is the Director of the School of Health Performance. Thank you so much, and thank you to your teams for working in the background to help make this happen. Greatly appreciated. Thank you. As well as thank you to Heather Nietley and Daniel McCann, Daniel, for helping to pull this together. We didn't do it alone. Many of you put your hands up to help out, to offer assistance, and we'll meet many of you as well. So just current students, raise your hand online. It helps. How many current students do we have here? Don't be shy. All right. We've got to get you mixed in with some of the other lot as well, by the way. Really, this is for you. This is an opportunity for you to hear what people have been doing with this field of ergonomics over many locations, over many years, over so many different career paths. So please, by all means, we want you asking questions. Alumni, how many of us have gone through the program? Okay, that's a good number. It's a very good number. So all of whom either worked under John, closely with John, or whose careers were inspired by John. Current faculty. All right, and former faculty. All right, this is great. And I don't know how many times these four groups of people actually come together. So this is great that we've been actually able to be here under not the most ideal circumstances and conditions. As I said, I graduated back in 2000. I first met John in kinesiology 1104. I still remember the nomenclature of that particular class. And as I think about it, it's probably the only number I remember from all the classes that I took, except for yours, John, of course. 1104 and John's, I remember them all. But it was John who introduced me to this term ergonomics, and really opened up my mind to what we could do with this professionally. And it was actually a seminal moment from an academic standpoint, because I could finally answer the question, what do you possibly do with a kinesiology degree? And I had an answer, and many of us found that answer through John. And the easiest way to describe John is that he was always in service to his students. And he was in service to his students by making connections. So that's why we're here. And again, just to recognize people who've made some big efforts to get here. Stephen Jenkins from Alabama, Kyle from Chicago, Tony, who's come all the way from County Clare in Ireland, and Jerome, your son, yeah? Jerome, is this your first time in Canada? What do you think? All right, and will PSG win the Champions League this year? All right, put your money on it, put your money on it. So we're gonna focus on three things today, design, research, and complexity. So just to kind of put that into context, across OECD countries, there are 1 billion people who are working who could use our services today. You extrapolate that across the rest of the world with users of products and services, and we can see the value that we can bring to the table. Now, the challenge that we've got as a discipline is to do that systematically, to do that at scale. It's clear that people need us. We just can't afford to do to serve them as we're one at a time. So first session will be around the future of design. Stephen Jenkins will be moderating that. Really, this is for a lot of us, that early connection between design and behavior and performance. That was a nice link that helped us kind of think differently, helped us serve our organizations that we work with and work for much better. The second session is a student research pitch session. So we'll have a few of the students who are here present their research. And the last one is kind of a fireside chat on managing complexity. We'll have, I think Leslie will be on the call. Are you there, Les? Oh, hey, Les. And Ray McCabe will be here. He'll be here bang on 1 o'clock, right? Yes, parking's not a problem. Okay, all right. So again, students, we're hoping that you can ask questions, get involved. If there are any questions online, please put them in the chat. Chris is going to stop us, or at the very least, lightly introduce the questions as they come in. Because I think for a lot of us who've gone through the program, we didn't have anything like this when we were through the program. And we all would have liked to have something like this. And I certainly know John would have liked this. And I can almost see him kind of sneaking in the corner a bit late and then just beaming his smile when he sees so many familiar faces. Now, what John wouldn't like is those people that he loves and respects tripping over themselves to say nice things about him, in public no less, but that's what friends do. So let's kick off the opening remarks with Dr. Brenda Barrett. Brenda, please come on up as I'll read your bio. I'm going to get this right. You're the Dean of Faculty of Health.
That's correct.
Yeah, and you have an OT background.
Yep.
And now I'm going to read this.
Okay.
So you have conducted research on interprofessional health education, curriculum design, and evaluation. Yeah, and is an international expert in the assessment of motor process skills. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Brenda,
right.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. And as I was thinking about kind of the spirit of the day and John McCabe, who I didn't really know personally, but I know his work, and thinking about human factors, human design, storms coming, coaching, mentorship, and your ability to pivot and still make this event happen with kind of this impending storm coming, kudos to all the organizers. And I would think that John would be very proud of that. I am going to read, because there's a lot of important things I would like to say about John and his legacy, and I don't want to bumble back or forget anything. So apologies for reading. So as you said, I'm Brenda Meredith, Dean of the Faculty of Health. And again, it's my pleasure to be here to celebrate the memory of John McCabe. Today, we celebrate a wonderful teacher and mentor who spent 37 years of his life dedicated to countless students who are now proud Dalhousie alumni. And we have some of those in the room today. John McCabe was a professor of kinesiology in the School of Health and Performance. When he passed away in September of 2021, the Dalhousie community lost not only a great scholar, but a great friend and mentor. John was a thought-provoking, caring, and inspiring professor. His steady guidance, coaching, friendship influenced generations of students to reach the highest levels of achievement in their career. And I think that is very evident today with who we have in the room and online. The theme of today's colloquium builds on John's legacy and work, building the human factors community by making connections. It will showcase the latest thinking and design and complexity management for students in human factors. John epitomized how true mentorship and active teaching can be transformative to students. He embraced the empowering role professors can play in helping students chart their careers. And we're going to see a little bit of those careers, how they've charted out today, I believe. This afternoon, I invite you to connect, learn, and be inspired by this event as we honor the memory of Dalhousie's most respected professors.
Thanks. I can call you Brenda. Okay, great. All right. Thank you, Brenda. I'll now call on Lorraine, yes, to come on up. So Lorraine, as I mentioned, is the director of School of Health and Performance, where she's worked since 2000. She knew John as they overlapped within the department, and she was always looking forward to St. Patrick's Day to hear John's stories and jokes. Now, let's not repeat those because, of course, Tony's here. So with that, Lorraine, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. And I'm so excited to be able to bring greetings from the school. But before we get going, I'd be amiss if after Michael thanked everybody else for their involvement, we didn't take a huge round of applause to thank him and Heather and Dan together for the collective work. And again, as Dr. Merritt mentioned, in the midst of a storm, and they're saying like the storm of the century. So thank you, everybody, for coming out today and for your time. I also wanted to read something because I was thinking back to John, and whenever he would bring readings, he would generally pull something out and sort of think about it. And the things I remember the most of him were, as we mentioned, the St. Patrick's Day celebrations. And of course, he'd come out and there'd be like, pull something out of the backpack and be like, hey, did anybody know that? Anybody is? And there would always be incredible passion, energy, and celebration. And those St. Patrick's Day celebrations, we haven't continued those since he left, because without him, they weren't the same. It was he was missing from it. So hopefully we see him today, feel him today in the celebration. And there's a little bit of that Irish spirit running through as we learn and we celebrate today. So I also wanted to say too that Brenda spoke briefly to the work that John had done in our school, but he was also really intricately involved with student athletes as a coach, assistant coach, performance analysis with both the volleyball teams and the basketball teams. So he affected a huge wave of students and our student athletes as well, and it really impacted them. So lovely to have Al Scott here today and to bring that legacy that he, sort of another tier that John brought. I was interested, though, that I wasn't even aware of this aspect of his life and the work that he'd done as well with the Center for Work and Health. That was an area that he shared sort of very briefly with us and that was something that I wasn't even aware of in terms of the actual work he was doing through there as an ergonomist. So again, even through his research and work, he was simultaneously working to impact the field and to make ergonomics positions a better passion and discipline for the field of kinesiology. So thank you so much to everybody that's here today. I'm very honored to be here, and I think that the maybe the Irish tears is what the rain is happening today. So we feel a lot of John here with us, and let's enjoy the celebration. Thank you.
Okay, last speaker for our opening remarks is going to be one of John's long serving colleagues and friends, John Cozy. John retired from the School of Health and Performance in 2019, where he was cross-appointed in biomedical engineering, industrial engineering. His focuses were on occupational and industrial biomechanics, as well as marine and offshore safety. Speaking as someone who's flown offshore many times, thank you. He currently splits his time between his home here at Halifax and his cottage in Pugwash. If you're thinking, how does a man who looks so young retire so early? Well, that's because John's fortunate enough to have an amazing wife, Cheryl, who's still working. And his other financial crutch is his 95-year-old father, who is also still working. And this man, you can look it up on the CBC, physically moves homes and buildings for a living. Like, that's a proper job for a 95-year-old. And Cheryl's got to be thinking, how long is just John going to be that? How long will he be retired for? So how long might it be working for? Imagine. Hey, Ray. Nice to see you. Hey, come on in. John, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Michael, and again, thank you for going off script. You're just there's a certain amount of consistency in interacting with you. Thank you. I want to say a special hello to Dean Merritt and Dr. Raymond. Thank you. I know this is a busy time of year, and I'm sure that today is not helping your schedule much, but thank you for being here. And as I look around, I see lots of former students and colleagues. It's great to get together in person. I'm a little out of touch with teaching because I gave up that gig and have moved on to other things. But there are a couple of things that I think it's important to say about John. And when I look around in the room, what I see is the harvest of his hard work, and that you represent all the good things about him. And he was diligent. And the word that I would use to describe John was loyal. He was loyal to higher education. He was loyal to his family, friends, and colleagues. And he was just outstanding at being there for people and really, really tried to pursue truth and knowledge. He was just outstanding at it. I've also traveled with him a little bit, and there are some important things you need to know about John. Never agree to speak second when another person is intelligent, smooth talking, friendly, because you will not have any time on an equal distribution. Everyone wants to talk to him. He was a storyteller, and that's how he disseminated information. Okay. The other thing to know about John would be always check your facts if you're going to engage in a conversation about the U.S. Civil War, college football or basketball, and all things Irish. But John was very, very helpful to me in my career. I met him in, I believe it was the fall of 1979 or maybe 1980. He and I didn't know each other. We were both invited to a meeting in Toronto at the time when Basketball Canada was trying to build a development model for youth sport and basketball. John was there because of his knowledge of motor learning, motor skills, his passions for sport. I had to have no idea how I got there. Okay? I was a grad student at Waterloo, and I was somehow invited to the thing. And I quickly found out that I was in over my head. You know, it was just, what am I doing here? And he was the one who sort of easily saw what was going on and stepped in and helped me get through that meeting. And we ended up helping with a bunch of other people co-author a little book that was used for a long time. I'm going to just double check my notes to make sure I haven't forgotten too many things. But you know, in 1982, I moved to Halifax and I would catch up with John at sporting events and things. And then I went back to school, and in 1993, my life changed. I got a phone call from John McCabe. He said, "Are you still looking for a job?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, we've got one at the school." So he hired me in 1993. It was a retirement position. And if you know anything about universities, retirement positions sort of float around, and then suddenly they turn into other things. And so ironically, it was at a time when my wife and I had just bought a house. We had, our debt load was through the roof, and I didn't have a job. And so all of a sudden, everything fell into place. And he then mentored me through lots of different things. And let me finish off by saying a couple of really important things. And when I look at you, I see the fruits of his endeavors, and congratulations to all of you for your achievements. He would be very happy to see what you've done. And I think the thing that would make him the happiest is for you to follow his legacy and be loyal to your profession and reach out to help other people, because that's really what he was all about. Thank you.
John, thanks so much. Slide into the camera there. So we are going to kick off with the academic portion of the curriculum now. A little bit of pressure for you, Stephen, as our moderator for the first session. But again, and the moderators will reiterate this. We want this to be interactive. We want these panels to evoke some new thoughts and some new thinking. So by all means, please do feel free to chime in. Chris is at the ready to introduce questions that come through the chat, and the moderators and panelists can pick up the questions that come through here in the room. So with that, let me ask Stephen Jenkins to come up to the floor. He will moderate the first session on the future of human factors in design. Now, along with treasured memories of playing and watching basketball with John, hopefully we're doing it at the same time. Stephen is eternally grateful to John's invaluable mentorship through his thesis, work on his thesis, and his sabbaticals. John was instrumental in kickstarting Stephen's 30-year career in the field, which has him now as vice president, is that right, of safety and health at Cintas Corporation, based in Auburn, Alabama. Cincinnati, sorry, but you are based in you're based in Alabama, so I wasn't that wrong. He's grateful and humbled to be here celebrating John with everybody. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. And Kyle, if you want to join me, I'm going to pull over. I am excited, and for you students in the room, please take advantage of this. Ask any questions that you want, because when I was at your state of life, as I was saying to you, Grace, the idea of a career in kinesiology, I didn't know what it meant. And two Johns really helped me out. Mr. Cozy as the head of research at the Nova Scotia Sports Medicine Clinic, and the man that we're here to celebrate today, John McCabe, really lit a path for me. And as it did for many of us. Is Darcy going to be joining us on?
Yeah, hi, I'm
Hi, Darcy, there you
here. Hey,
I
Hey,
can
guys.
see you in front of me. Just that might be a good thing. Well, let me start with the man in the middle. I'm really excited to be here today, number one, because first of all, a lot of people I haven't seen for a long time, I get to chat with. Secondly, the experience that I'm sitting beside here is really interesting. And we're going to try to do a meld of things here for you today. We want to talk about human factors and ergonomics, but we also want to explore it in terms of how it operates in business. And we've got two exciting people. And Darcy, I can see you in little person up there. Welcome from Prince Edward Island.
I wish I was there. It looks like so much fun. Thank you.
So let me start by introducing the person on the far right. I'll go in chronological order here. Charles graduated from the kinesiology program in 1992 here at Dow, and he continued to go on to get his Master's of Education and his MBA. You sound as just like me, searching. Yeah. He credits John McCabe for the inspiration in his lifelong learning. Through John's mentorship, Charles took what he learned with respect to human factors and applied it to the context of business operations. Consideration of how people work has influenced Charles' career path over the past 25 years. Today, Charles is the Director of Operational Improvement for Advocate Printing and Publishing and resides here in the good province of Nova Scotia. Kyle is joining us, as already stated, from Illinois. He was a 1998 graduate of the Kinesiology Bachelor Program when Dr. McCabe supervised his honors thesis project. His work adventures have brought him to locations in 5 continents, and his career spans more than 20 years in design of agriculture, construction, motorsport, and emergency vehicles, as well as industrial tools and medical devices. He is currently the Chief Operating Officer of Sabanto, thank you, developing technologies that bring automation and autonomy to production agriculture. Thank you both for joining me. And then finally, as I mentioned, from Prince Edward Island, I'm turning my head to look at you, Darcy. Thank you for joining us. Darcy Jeremy graduated in 2007. She has a Master's of Science. She's also a certified professional ergonomist. Her career thus far spanned many roles in both public and private sectors. She now provides corporate solutions and resources for ergonomics consultants and her company, Ergonomics Help. It was John who first let Darcy know about a career-making internship when she was in high school, no less. And Darcy fondly remembers meeting John in high school, I've got that there, and having John as a supervisor for an undergraduate thesis. So we go from business operations to removing people from vehicles these days, as opposed to cab design and AI and getting into automation. And we've got someone who works in the human factors field remotely. So let me start with you. What's the future of ergonomics? What's the future of human factors? Kyle?
I was going to say, with the irony of my career, you know, the kid that got hired to put people in machines is now running a company that takes people out. You know, it's probably not a good look for your students about the profession, but trust me, your skills are going to be in high demand. But yeah, the business is really, the business of the science, you know, is going through this fundamental shift. And we've discussed this in the past, of course, but when we were in school, you know, it was the physical ergonomic revolution, right? It was fitting the task to the man, if you guys, you know that title, you know, and all these kinds of things. But, you know, my own career evolved over the last, you know, 20 years and change. And, you know, to what the current revolution is, which is cognitive ergonomics, right? You know, and real the mental and attentional aspects of human interaction with various systems. And of course, I'm in the automation and autonomy space. So humans are doing ever less acting, monitoring, deciding. A lot of these systems are self-monitoring, you know, self-healing, self-optimizing. And so, you know, it's no less important that humans, you know, still have to interact with these, you know, these systems and technologies, but it's in a different way. And, you know, so instead of active management, it's more management by exception. So, you know, humans are all ultimately still in executive control of these automated and autonomous systems. And I'll use the example. A couple of weeks ago, my kids and I were going to visit a friend, and he's building a cottage. So we're driving from Northern Illinois into Indiana. And I'm driving along, and I'm passing this. It's a Tesla Model Y. And my son Peyton's 10. It's like, Dad, I think that guy's sleeping. And I said, what? And he's like, yeah, the guy in that car, he's totally sleeping. So I look over at the driver of this car, and he's literally tongue out, passed out in the driver's seat of a Tesla Model Y. So, and I've driven a Tesla. I don't particularly trust, how they operate quite yet, but okay. But the whole point of that story is you can have automated and autonomous systems and, things do themselves, but humans are still in ultimate executive control of these things, right? So, it's just, like I said, it's interacting in a different way. So like I said, for you students out there, probably not a good look, that we're taking humans out of things, but trust me, the skills and knowledge that you guys are acquiring are in ever higher demand. And understanding, these systems are more complex and they will continue to be. And so the skills and, like I said, the skills and knowledge that you guys are acquiring, throughout your education, the early parts of your career, you're going to be in very high demand. And like I said, because, humans still interact with, like I said, these large scale complex systems. So.
Well, Kyle, as a guy who works with a company who put about 20,000 drivers on the road every day, you make me a little nervous. No,
You don't want them to have a job.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to that. So removing people from work and how do we do that as a human factors and how do we contribute to that? Darcy, you've got even slightly different take on this, and you've got a take that you're applying a technology that's been around for a little while, but through a totally different modality. And COVID certainly forced us in the company I'm involved in, Cintas, to really adapt this type of approach. But you're really pushing it forward with what we do. Do you want to talk a little bit about what space you're in human factors these days?
I would love to. So I came across really an interesting stat that really shares the changing dynamic of the world. So even before the pandemic happened, there was a 159% increase of people moving to remote work. Remote work is such what is still considered new and refreshing, but you know what? Like, this is the way of the future: remote work, remote support, remote ergonomics. So if you're a student sitting in this room right now and you're considering where the future could be, remote support in that way that you can reach people that you never considered working with before throughout the world is huge. Remote work in terms of setting up your skills in such a way to present it to people who can buy your things is something to consider as well. And let's face it, we are probably never going to be going back to a world where people are working in a so-called office. So when you think of the opportunity there, what kind of information can you share with the business leaders to position yourself as the go-to expert in your specific area of knowledge? And if there's one thing that you really, I guess, consider moving forward, what's your unique value proposition that business leaders are going to care about? Because as Kyle mentioned, it's not going to go away, but the way that we present that information to business leaders will need to be modified. Because one more stat before I pass it on, and this is in a Forbes article, and it looked at voluntary exit. So when people were leaving over the past couple of years, you probably heard the Great Resignation. And when that was happening, there was a cost of 2 times that person's annual compensation to replace that person and all the indirect costs. So just like in physical ergonomics, the cost of a person's injury is very much more indirect compared to direct. The same is true with remote work and supporting those employees and the business leaders with your specific knowledge in ergonomics and showing and deciding which is the best way to present that information.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting, Darcy. I'm really intrigued by the space you're in. We at Cintas, we have, I don't know, say 800 locations. I can never keep track of them. And we've had even people in sales that have considered a very intimate type of relationship in selling to large corporate customers, talk about how they're leveraging Teams, and they have literally more questions or remote, I should say, remote connectivity. We just have these Teams more often than Zoom. But they're really struggling to figure out how do they make those connections. And I've heard a lot from psychologists or read a lot about all of the things that we lose through working remotely, and that interpersonal connection, those nonverbal cues. The fact that we're only seeing from a certain point up. How are you dealing with those sort of challenges in the way you interact with your clients and your participants?
Well, to bring that fact to a broader context too, I'm in a unique position where my clients are ergonomics consultants all over the world, and they've never been more busy. And at the same time, there's people who are getting into ergonomics because they see that it's a cash cow, and so to speak, that they can charge a lot of money for relatively straightforward, simple assessments. So in terms of the way I find my clients are negotiating this world is that they are communicating with business leaders that I lost my train of thought there. There are a variety of ways that they can handle the ergonomics, but just looking at the physical ergonomics itself is not enough to get into that business to start the relationship, because there's just so many people doing this now. If they can talk to the bigger issues that business leaders actually care about, then you can get in and start putting in the psychosocial elements that can bring about bigger change, such as management support, management communication, and the various other ways that companies are handling with remote work right now. So there's so much opportunity, but again, that communication speak, I find that we can, if you're a student right now, there's a variety of ways that you can look at that and put it into place of how you talk about what you do as ergonomists, because it's still very much a black box, I think. And there's a lot of branding that we can do as ourselves so that the public can really understand the potential that you bring to the table.
Thank you. That's sort of taking that full circle, and I thank you for that, because at the end of the day, we've got to get a check signed, whether you're a researcher seeking a grant or whether you're in private business like myself, getting my budget approved on a regular basis. And I can't think of no one better to think someone who's gone full circle than you, Charles, starting off as a consultant trying to sell your services, but now sitting on the other side of the table as an operations manager, buying services and applying it. And I know you still think like an ergonomist. So tell us about where human factors is in your head as an operations manager.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I remember being on the side of the table where you're trying to create a pitch for which somebody's going to buy your service and buy your ideas and buy your concepts. And now on this side of the table where you're managing a budget and you're waiting for people to pitch to you, and you're, in my role, what I've gone through is listen, and then almost under the table, you should maybe just add that to your pitch. And then yes, that's why we want to do that. Yes. It's been interesting from my standpoint, because one of the things that I have seen change tremendously over the past number of years is really twofold, which has influenced tremendously what we do in terms of capital investments in labor, investments in R&D, and those two things, and one of them is always the same. It typically comes up in every one of the conversations that this group of people typically have, and it's people. And one of the things that has changed significantly about the people that we work with and we interact with is what they know. What they knew 20, 15, 10, 5 years ago is tremendously different. People are incredibly informed, more informed than what they've ever been. And what's interesting is that they bring that level of information to the discussions, to the table. When you're in a unionized environment or non-unionized environment, they're looking for a way to be able to share their ideas. They want to be a part of what's happening. They want to be able to share their ideas. They want to know what are the decisions that are being made and how are we making those particular decisions. And it's interesting because if we do poorly in that, what we do is we risk losing that piece of knowledge, because they know that if they're not going to be regarded well, and looked after in this process, they'll walk, because the opportunity is there somewhere. Somebody's interested in having their opinion brought to the table, and so it's an interesting sort of paradigm. They want to be engaged. They want to be involved. So let them. And one of the people that taught me the significance of that was, in fact, John. And I can remember, and I digress a little bit, but it's a good story. We were on a job, and it was a pretty significant employer, and we had a student that was with us.
So can I interject for a second?
Yes, sir.
Charles has a unique perspective that he also worked in a business with John,
Yeah.
consulting when John was doing a side shingle.
And John Cozy got dragged into us with us in the mud sometimes too, and Dave Chasson, who unfortunately couldn't be here. But on this particular job, it was a big employer, and we had this student that was with us, and she was a feisty student, and we were going down for the purpose of trying to understand what's happening. And the best way to understand is to talk to people that are on the floor. So we set up these mediums for people to share their ideas and thoughts, and we started at like probably 5 a.m. We went through to probably 7 p.m. that night. And she was the note taker, and John was the facilitator. I was in room A, he was in room B. And about halfway through the day, she came up to me, she pulled me to the side, and she said, "I don't get it." And I said, what do you mean you don't get it? John knows all the answers. Why does he keep doing this? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, we've got this set of questions. We've gone through 4 groups, and they're all the same. She says, why do we keep doing that? And I said, because he needs to, as do I, we need to engage every member of this particular group of people, to give everybody from the day shift, the afternoon, and then the back shift this chance to voice their opinion and their thought. And we need to capture that. And if we're going to develop a set of solutions, what better way than to engage this group of people and say, hey, you brought the ideas to us, we're going to make them come to life. And he taught me how important that piece was. And today, I think it's even more important than it was back then, if I can say that. The second point that I think it's changed significantly from a design and an ergonomics and human factors piece. People have influenced the way that we make decisions at the table. But the other thing that's changed significantly are the customers for whom we build and we manufacture our products for. They don't want to be associated with a bad employer. They want to be associated with a positive culture, a good employer. And so what they've been doing is a lot of their own ethical audits. They'll send an independent team to come in and work and assess, do we want to do business with you? Do we want you to supply us? Because just like people have choices, they have choices as to who's going to provide their products to them. And so it has really changed the mentality of, it's not just money that's going to influence my decision to move forward with something. It's what's truly going to be the impact on the people, and how is it going to resonate in the community as well. And so those are just a couple of key things that I see that have really evolved and changed considerably.
I want to pick up on the second point, Kyle. I think it really goes back to what you started to talk about, is that you think, oh, I'm just going to go and AI it. I'm just going to go put in this artificial intelligence and sort of run the show. But you found in making that transition, it's required more listening. It's required more human factors to understand how do we get rid of people in a cab and let them sleep in a Tesla.
Right, definitely. I'm going to go to that, but I want to lean into something that Charles said. But it's something that I've studied in the context of my leadership journey, like rising executive leadership, but was the information asymmetry in a situation like that. So you have executive and senior management. Oh, we got to do something about this, and then you have sort of the grassroots, you know, people on the floor, right? And they know what's wrong, right? And we need a little help, you know, and a little bit of, you know, sort of facilitating, right, to you know to work at some solution. But the problems are known, and much the same is in executive decision making in any context, right? But it's ergonomics in this case, right? But this notion that the answers are out there, and we just need to bridge the gap. And as you know, I find that my skills as an ergonomist have always served me well in my leadership roles because I understand that dynamic, and sort of you're helping executive management. They're making the decisions, but they don't have the information necessarily they need, right? And what we're doing is we're taking that information, we're synthesizing it, and saying, yeah, like you said, she knew that we knew the answer, right? But it's kind of, you know, I had an early work mentor. He said, you know, you can show them, you know, because you know, and then you can convince them with data. And pardon the expression was like, you can murder them with their own data, right? Which is you can really just make it happen. It's like, hey, this is what's really going on. It's your people. It's not me saying it. It's like, so like I said that. But as ergonomists and human factors engineers, whatever, you know, whatever context we're working, that is a unique skill that I think that, you know, that our education and experience brings, is to be able to sort of, you know, get quickly to a real solution, you know, that kind of thing.
Can I interject for 1 second?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think for the people that I've kept in touch with out of this program, whether it's J.D. Mallon or Darren or you two or whoever, that's been one of the most common phrases that I hear, is that I use my skills as an ergonomist, as a human factors person, as a person coming to the kinesiology program, of understanding people. And you know, what John, one of the skills that John really gave me, and I think he gave it to all of us, is really exploring people and how do people think and how do people respond to things. And I use that truly as a business consultant. In my final years at Auburn Engineers, I was less of an ergonomics consultant. I was much more of a business process consultant. And I think that's a realm that a lot of us have moved into, whether we plan to do it or not.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you mentioned that.
I tell people that aren't familiar with the profession, like what you do, I'm like, I'm a professional empath, right?
Yeah.
And just basically, you know, understanding stakeholders in the system or in the situation, and truly taking on their point of view in a meaningful way, and say, yeah, what would I think of, you know, this particular approach or doing it this way, and understanding, you know, how do the solutions and the outcomes affect them, and that includes the person on the floor and the executive manager. You know, you're, like you said, you're judging a pitch, someone that has, you know, a solution or approach or kind of thing, and your criteria for a positive outcome are much different than theirs. You know, they want to sell to you. You want a solution that works, and of course, the people on the floor, they want a solution that works for them too. So, like I said, this whole notion of professional empathy and stakeholder understanding, and you know, that's a big part of, like I said, the skill set that I think that we sort of naturally kind of, you know, have, you know, once we sort of escape academia. But it's like I said, I don't think it's just a legacy of the profession, but it's equally a legacy of John's, right? This active listening to understand, not respond. You know, you might have heard that saying before, but definitely personified. Like I said, the mentorship that I think John has provided to all of us.
So if there are any questions from either students or Zoom world, please don't hesitate to pass them along.
I see a lot of chat bubbles there, Chris. You got any? No, okay.
Okay, all good. So I want to go, we talked a little bit about this and we're preparing, getting on the phone. And I said to the three of you, can you remember what your thoughts were like when you were in 4th year and where you thought you were going to go? And what was the biggest gap? What was the biggest thing or something that you learned that you wish in 4th year someone had mentioned to you, or when you're doing your master's?
Yeah.
Darcy, you want to start with that?
I only heard half of that question. So what I'm hearing, fourth years or graduates, what's one thing that you wish you knew?
Fourth year, going back to your fourth year, what do you wish you knew as a fourth year, entering the world of human factors, ergonomics, a career?
I'm wondering if maybe you can move the mic closer to Stephen. It's
We got
just,
you, Darcy.
yeah, it's, or the computer.
Got us? I'm sorry, I'm not talking.
No, it's totally-
What did you wish that you knew in fourth year, where you sit in your career now, that would have been beneficial in your trajectory of your career?
In fourth year, one of the things that I found to be so productive was getting as much real world experience as I could. And John was instrumental with that. I was working in Charles, doing an internship with Charles, and doing my independent study through one of Charles's jobs. So the big thing that I've had an issue was with theory and changing that to practical aspects of ergonomics. And it's not what you know, but how much value you can provide the colleagues that you're working with, your peers, and that employer that is paying the bills to what you're doing. And then this goes for if you're going to be consulting or if you're going to be working within an organization. It's both the practical aspects, but then going back to what the discussions were earlier with listening, I think that is huge. And the really neat thing here too, going back to when I was a student, and that's it's like 15 years ago at this point. But
Darcy,
what's that?
I said, seems like yesterday to me.
Seems like yesterday to me, my word. But the world shifts so much, and especially today, it's the speed at which the changes are coming through with AI and what's on the horizon. Being able to have the statistics and to have that theory and the facts, but then engage with those practical aspects to why you might be called in to do a job. There's a really famous saying when it comes to marketing and selling your services, and it's you want to sell what they think they need, but then sell what they want, but deliver what they need. So it may be that you get into the door with some of the more trendy things going on in the world, but really they need an ergonomics assessment and you can bring these psychosocial aspects in and the other aspects to that ergonomics assessment, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I've noticed, if I can build on that for just 1 second, is that going back to my consulting career, there were all these companies that were looking for service, and they all put it on the umbrella of human factors, or they all put it on the umbrella of ergonomics, but they really didn't know what that meant. And you could have came up with 6 different color boxes, and they would have taken one. And really working with them to define what they want was as big a job as actually providing them the service. So understanding what the structure is about the console was a big opportunity. I'm not sure, because you deal with such a structured clientele, whether that's something you come across or not. And so sit here and talk, I wonder, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, we're not catching any of that, and I'm sure that was a wonderful point.
Well, I'm going to pivot then, and I'm going to go because
Can-
it's also a great segue to talk about.
Can anybody?
Okay, that's a great question. Can anybody hear us?
Yeah, I'm gonna say projects and I'm gonna try to come up with a better like.
Okay. Yeah, gotcha.
Hello, back in the
All right,
room.
we can do that.
Yeah, I'm going to shout at you,
All right,
Kyle.
yeah.
that's a great pivot point, and that pivot point is we may want to move further apart, number one. But that pivot point is you started off the whole conversation talking about AI. Where do you see that going? Because that's going to impact every one of us, regardless of what we end up doing. And what is the future, and where are you going with all that?
Yeah. I think the
Can you start by describing a little bit more about your company and what you're actually doing?
Yeah, sure. So the company I work for now, we make autonomous and automation technology for production agriculture systems. So tractors, combine harvesters, but really just automating farm machinery to be simple about it. The necessity of doing that, or the driver for doing that, is not about taking people out of machines, which is the kind of the conversation starter primer I brought later. It's actually about resolving a problem that already exists, which is availability of skilled labor. So there are ever fewer people involved in production agriculture. At the turn of the 20th century in America, and I happen to use this statistic in a speaking engagement that I did about 10 years ago, but fully more than 30% of the US population was engaged in food production. That number today is less than 2%. So we have ever fewer people in charge of feeding ever more of the population. So, and then, so that makes the machines, we call it bigger, faster, better, right? So we're trying to have fewer people producing more food. And then there are other impacts to the business by doing it that way, but the constraint is human, it's labor. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to resolve that problem, which is, a farmer that can't find someone to run the grain cart when they're combining in the fall, because it's 3 to 4 weeks of work, and you need someone who knows how to drive a tractor with a grain cart. And it's that is semi-skilled, but you just can't find people to do it. And so that's a big constraint to, let's say, successful, production. So then now what are we doing? We're developing these, technology is such that we have these systems that, we can automate the machinery. But ultimately, you can make a car drive. So I talked about the Tesla example. Can it drive well? Not so much yet, right? It's pretty good, but it's not great. And sort of the same thing. So we can make mechanical systems do things, but we're still judging them in humanistic ways. So that's how we judge their ultimate performance, right? So the AI is, the engineering and technology types are like, oh, we need more sensors, we need more processing power, we need, this and that, the other thing. The truth is, the ultimate performance or success of those systems are judged in humanistic terms. So when a farmer is looking behind, he's towing a tillage implement, and he's looking at the quality of the soil tilth behind the implement. It's a visual task, right? It's definitely a human task for judging that performance. And so, but you can have our
There. All right, it should be good.
Yep. So, as I said, so then if it's, or if you're driving a tractor and it's not performing properly, it's got a funny sound, that kind of thing, that's a humanistic judgment, right? It's a human sensing modality, right? The engineers all want to put a bunch more sensors, and how could we do that? And, but ultimately, for our case, let's say if it's the soil tilth, it's actually a computer vision problem. So it's a technological solution, but it's judged and framed in a humanistic assessment model. I don't need a bunch of soil sensors and moisture and tilth, which is how much air we put back into the thing. So once again, we're taking humans out, and yet the ultimate sort of arbiter of that system's performance are human judges, right? Because ultimately a human assesses how well this thing performs. So there's the technological aspects of that, but then there's also as you automate and autonomize and you build AI into this machinery and to optimize the performance, a lot of that mathematical and then computer science, the code. It's a lot of self-optimization, and it's a bit of a black box. So you might not be able to actually understand how it works. It's literally like some of the systems we have, they cannot be explained by a human, but the ultimate result is actually fairly optimized. So there's this whole thing of how do you describe a theory of operation of a system, but you don't really know what it's doing. You just say that thing actually, it does it good, it does it well. Don't worry about it. That's one of the guys that's in my engineering organization is like, it just works kind of thing. So, but that creates, so this leads me to the point I was trying to make, which is these increasingly automated and autonomous systems, there's a trust factor that we need to manage. And is what are the salient points of this system that will give the operator confidence that the system is performing well, that it's safe, all this kind of thing.
So do I need to know it behaves like me? Is that part of the trust?
The question is, do you want it to behave like you?
Well, that is a great
Right?
question.
I mean, I don't think
I'm not going to answer
I
that
don't think
honestly.
I'd want a Tesla to behave like I drive,
Right.
kind of thing. So
Does it need to make some of the decisions that I make? Is that part of the learning process that you're going through?
yeah, which is what are the appropriate decisions to let it have? And then what are the most appropriate decisions for you to be making in the system? And so then there's sort of, like I said, there's the trust factor, right? I trust it to do this. I ultimately want to have executive control over doing these 5 things. So that's where it's a different type, like when we were in academia before we graduated, even early in our careers, it was the human acted upon the system did something, and there was an expected result or an unexpected result. That's all short. Now it's the system does. What are the different outcomes, positive or negative, do I want to know about? Because you can be overwhelmed with the information. But if you trust the piece of the intelligent pieces of the system to do these things down here, and I trust it, I'm like, I don't need to know about that. I'm managing by exception now. It's like, tell me if there's a problem, tell me if there's one developing, tell me if there's an active problem, or tell me everything seems okay, kind of thing. But it's so then we call it in the business, we call it, shifting to the left. So if you think before the industrial revolutions, humans did, right? Then you had, mechanical leverage. Then, industrial revolution, we had hydraulic, electric power, at least these force multipliers, right? Still talking about very physical things. And then as we shifted more towards, an electronics, kind of model, and the systems could actually do more control, it was more of a black box then, input, output, but it still was fairly consistent. And then so we're shifting the human further to the left from the actual doing to the making do. Then there's the understanding and deciding. Then there's just the monitoring. So the system's now deciding, you're monitoring the outcome, and then eventually, if there's an AI panacea, it's the system monitors, decides, monitors, and even full autonomy is it just does. So
We're going to hopefully come back to that.
there's a lot to unpack there, but that's
So
Good question.
yeah.
I apologize.
I'll be the first to ask a question. So we're talking about, AI, so we're shifting now from, we talk about the industrial revolution moving to industry 4.0. I take the standpoint that work is healthy, right? So it's important for us, and I go back to human factors, right? But the key word there is human. What's your guys' thoughts on, as we move into AI, we run into the possibility of the pancake mix theory, right? Where it was back in the 50s and 60s, they created pancake mix. All you had to do is add water. Wow, it was phenomenal. But it was horribly sold. It could, and what did they change? Add eggs. I think it was eggs, right? And all of a sudden it took off, exploded. Why? Because I had a connection to, it felt that I was actually contributing. So we talked about work and that. So we see a shift where as human factors, professionals, ergonomists, et cetera, that we can go, is it up to us in the future to say, hey, let's not go too far, because if we take human too far out of it, we're gonna lose in terms of what we talk about our bread and butter, which is employers and stuff like that. The last thing you want is a disengaged workforce, right? Because I've seen that in my professional as operations. You can go too far and then it's just response to the button. There's nothing about that, right? So I was just curious on your take on that possibility as we move into AI.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
No, it's fine. My response would be probably very different than his. But what I've seen in our industry and sort of from food manufacturing, into the print, we have made great strides through automation and mechanization, and with the express purpose of trying to get our labor under control, trying to create a system where you could minimize waste, reduce errors, create a quality product on time, right quantities, all that other good stuff. And in doing so, we've seen a labor reduction from the general laborer standpoint. But in turn, what we've seen is an increase in a different set of skills. So when we changed and introduced that automation and introduced that mechanization, we all of a sudden needed people to be able to maintain that equipment. And so what we've really seen is a shift in that particular group. And interestingly, I would say, while we were able to reduce, and I say that because that was an objective, was to reduce our labor pool, it actually transitioned into our maintenance team. We went from a maintainer group of almost 3 times what it was, even just prior to the start of COVID. And with some of the technology that we invested in, we saw this shift. So did our labor pool shift significantly? No, it did a little bit, but not to the same degree. And so those that were doing the ROIs were super happy because at the end of the day, all that money from your labor gets aggregated into one number and it's not significantly different. And it's because we're just seeing this real need or interest in a different type of skill set. So that's been our experience to date. That's what I've seen.
If I could add to that, it's getting harder and harder to staff jobs that were very typical 40 years ago. Might be, I don't have percentages on them like farm labor, but you can't hire for positions like you used to be able to, and I'm sure you see that in Michelin in that changeover. And so there very much is this change, not only to AI, I see, but also just this change in the working conditions, and all three of you touched on this a little bit, that folks are willing to absorb or put up with these days. And that we have a highly manual industry. We put people in vehicles and they deliver services to customers. And we do, as I jokingly say, I do laundry primarily in my business. And they're very manual jobs, but we're a long way from putting AI in, but we have to figure out how do we make them more tolerant, number one, but also how do we make them more error proof? And I know someone's going to be talking about the Swiss cheese model here. I saw the slide earlier. And it's a real challenge in decision making. And one of the reasons I joined Cintas from a consulting career I was very happy with is that we had to rely on people's decisions every single day. And Daniel McCabe came up with a great point. He said it, there you are. It's like we've got 18,000 sensors in the field every day. They just happen to be individuals. And Charles, I want to go back to something you said, is that you're collecting all this data with John and the listening skills you have to develop. It's really interesting because we've got this integration of all this data and all these personal data points coming together. And I don't know anybody who's doing a great job of taking all of that. And hence part of my question is I expect this vehicle to behave somewhat like I would behave. You're right, not my mistakes,
Right.
but what I think are my good decisions. And because 95% of us think we're in the top 5% of drivers, then, I'm pretty sure in my decisions, rightly or wrongly. And so are you seeing that in industry, just this influx of data? I know you are. Right?
for us, and and I think about my past, say 5 to 10 years, data that we found ourselves relying pretty heavily on, and I think this represents a significant opportunity for people within that human factors sort of background, is the ability to take data and be able to model it. And by that, I go back to sort of this whole thing that we talked about before in terms of listening. Your education that you're getting right now is enabling you to get such a broad spectrum of different pieces about how people work. And one of the things that we all could probably be better at is the ability to listen as to what's going on all around us. And particularly when you're at a table, when you're consulting, when you're working on a project, is to be able to listen and pull in all that information, all those facts. So when it comes to data collection, it always comes back down to the why. Why are you collecting the data in the first place? What's the outcome? What is it that you're trying to gain from this particular activity in this exercise? And if you can get to that and be really good at it, then what you can do is you can drive data to be able to create models to help solve that problem. And it could be, we're looking at doing an automation or mechanization project. We want to understand what's the potential for us to remove labor from that particular job. Now, we remove labor off of shift A, so I can use potentially some forecasting data to predict, am I going to have to create a shift B or a shift C to be able to deal with the changes in demand that happen? And so people that really can pull data and look at how product flows through, where do I need the human element, and then to be able to create the predictability of how often is this going to happen? Is this a blip in time for which I just need to have a core group of people for a short period of time, and to be able to maybe perhaps train them in to be 2 jobs, a hybrid. So I am going to work on this particular line for 6 months of the year. For the other 6 months, I'm going to be in something else. And being able to use data and be able to model it helps us to be able to make decisions in terms of where we want to invest our money and how we want to invest it. So that's what I've seen in terms of data and being able to pull it out. And that's how we've been trying to use it to help predict and make business decisions in terms of how we're going to go forward.
Yeah, it's such a challenge because we have more data coming at us than ever before. We don't know what it means. We don't know the connection. And I'm saying this on the broadest sense. And again, I go back to Daniel's point about in my seat having these 18,000 sensors, and how do I use them, and how do I use them wisely is a very, very big challenge. And it runs into all of these operational issues, because until Kyle figures out how to get everybody out of the seat they sit in Cintas, I'm going to have 45,000 people who make decisions every moment. And how do we figure out how they're going to make the best decisions in that situation? And the other side of data is distraction, and all of the issues that leads to. So Darcy, Scott, excuse me. On that point, are you seeing any themes with your consultants about what I can squeeze in here? Thank you, Chris.
I'm just going to turn the volume up on this too, so she can actually reply.
Darcy, can you hear us better?
I can. It's way better.
Thank you. Thank you. Darcy, what's your take on this whole thing about data and information? And again, you're coming at it from an entirely different perspective than the three of us.
Yeah. So with the AI, the perspective that I'm coming from is basically the ergonomics assessment tools, and there's a variety out there, and they keep coming to market, it seems, and they all want to meet with you, and they all want to tell you how great their software is. And when this really started to come to market a couple of years ago, maybe even more than a couple of years ago, a lot of the ergonomics professionals were very concerned with this. And there's absolute reason why, because there's a thought that the threshold of skills needing to get into ergonomics is now significantly lower, because you have AI letting you know where the ergonomics risk is for a particular job. At the same time, it increases the risk, right? Because there's professionals who may not have the same skill set as you doing these jobs.
Does that mean, sorry, Darcy, does that mean anything? Is that like,
No, I think the projector just is gone to
Oh,
sleep. So
okay.
we can still hear you, Darcy. We just can't see you.
We
Okay.
can see you, Darcy.
We can see you, Darcy.
We can see you,
Okay.
Darcy. We got you.
Hey guys. Okay, we're good. We're good.
good.
Okay, so there's the threshold to get into ergonomics is lower than ever before, especially because it's not a regulated health profession. And not saying that it needs to go that way at all. I feel the cream will always rise to the top. However, the fact with having these systems to assess the ergonomics risk, it can increase the amount of risk overall. Now these people have the tools bring out where the ergonomic risk is, but not what to do with the issue. So likewise, what you guys were talking about, so what can we do with this information? And AI can't give you the strategy or replace your experience to how to solve an ergonomics issue based on, let's say, what the rule says for a particular movement. However, that's where, again, the cream rises to the top, and it can really, you can really move forward and identify where the risk is, and that part can't be, I guess, deleted out of what you're doing professionally.
I'll riff off that a little bit. So there's a saying that I used earlier in my career, but a lot of the stuff I did was physical ergonomics, and we were in product development, and we did digital human modeling. So you would take a 3D CAD model and you would fit a digital human into there, and it's a tool. And they're like, why can't we just buy a bunch of jack and deploy it into the CAD development team, whatever, which we did, but within the right hands. And what the response I had was, well, it's a tool. So just because you have a Viking stove, it does not make you a chef, right? So it's, there's a knowledge and a thought process that you have to associate, or that you're using the tools to leverage and collect data, and to give a sort of objective kind of help to the sort of the work that you're doing. Going back to the the whole using the tools and the data, and we think about data drives us to the answer. But what I found, the point of view that sort of evolved over my career, another sort of idiom that I use, ergonomics is not a checklist, it's a mindset, right? It's you have to take the stakeholder point of view I talked about before. But what you really have to do is, it's not collect the data and the answer appears. In most of these situations, we kind of know the issue, and we know that, like, if there's a negative outcome, somewhere that we're trying to sort of alleviate or eliminate, but you have to start with, what's your vision of ideal, right? You have to have an expression of, what are we solving for? What is the issue? What is the problem? And then what are the salient data that contribute to the outcome? Then, okay, now we know what kinds of data we should collect, and and then we can interpret it in that way. So it's kind of a top-down approach, and in product development and in user experience, we call it the North Star, right? Which is your vision of ideal has to be, this is what you're shooting for, and you have to say, what do I have in my toolkit that's going to help us get to that ideal?
Well said. In just a couple minutes we have left here, Darcy, I'm just curious about when you think back to John and the influence he had on your career, what comes to your mind? You got a story for us, or an influential point?
There's so many stories of John, first of all, and him introducing us to the idea of ergonomics when we were in first or second year, which is absolutely huge. And I'm so grateful to that, mentoring us through the years. But I loved John's stories. One of the most memorable stories that I have, and I don't know if this resonates with you as well, of him flying planes. And one particular example is when he was flying a plane. He was telling the story in front of, I forget what class, like health and human performance, like 2000 class. And he says he's flying and then the engine breaks. It's not flying anymore. So he goes through a practical process of how he goes about to solve this issue. And he ended up solving it because he's still alive. He's with us. He was with us at the time doing that talk. But what I really took from that is having that perseverance to sit back in your chair and observe what is happening before jumping into a solution immediately. And that I'm really grateful for, to learn from him.
It's a great story. You know, I want to, you have any closing thoughts you want to put on the table here?
I'll share a quick story, and
Please.
and maybe again, I think yeah, it'll be quick. So Michael alluded to it. So it wasn't until after I graduated that I came back and actually truly became involved with John. And one of the times that I came to him, I was looking for some help, and so I said, John, I said, here's my problem, and he looked away from me, and I said, okay, maybe he's thinking about something else. I've wasted his time, so I'm trying to see what he's looking at. And he was basically going through his mind the book that I should have to answer my question. And so all of a sudden he says, don't move. So he goes up to his library, if you've ever been in his office, and he has this plethora of books and articles.
The whole wall.
And he starts
falling down,
pulling this stuff
books up.
out. And not only does he give me the book, he flips to the page within the book that has the answer to the question that I'm looking for. And I used the example earlier, like he would give you the shirt off of his back, and he was so kind and he was so generous, and he just taught me a great deal about what a mentor is, and very grateful for my time to have been able to work with him and get to know him.
Yeah, I thank you all. I just want to close with, on my computer to this day, I have a picture of John when he was on sabbatical, when I was still living in New Brunswick. My daughter, who was joining us this morning, was not born yet at that point, and she's a fourth-year student here today. And I've got a picture of John walking up the stairs with my second son, who at the time was about 3 years old. And if you've ever met my second son, and Leah can attest to this, he talks better than I do, way too much. And he was talking John's ear off, and he'd go down early in the morning and get John and wake him up, telling him knock knock jokes probably. And I have this picture of them walking up the stairs, and John is bent over holding his hands and talking to him. And he's beside him on the stairs. And I carry that picture because John has always been beside me in my thought processes. I use so many things that he has taught me today. And I've had the pleasure over my career of consulting in all over the world in some of the largest organizations in the world, and even today in my position. And John McCabe is a big piece of what I have relayed to lots and lots of companies. And I thank you for your father and the gifts and everything that he gave to us. And you can see the influence that he's laid on many situations, and the tentacles that he has put out there are just so vast. So it is my absolute privilege to just be able to talk with the three of you today about the future of human factors and all the seeds that John has planted with us. Thank you, Darcy.
Thanks, Darcy.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Darcy. Don't go away. She's still there. I know. She's still there. Thanks so much, Darcy, coming from PEI. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Cal. Thank you, Charles. We've got a couple minutes as we shift to the student research pitch session. So we're going to have 5 students,
Yes.
5 students who are going to give us a 3 to 4 minute pitch, try for 3. And then we'll have 3 judges who will be, I guess, testing the applicability to industry of this research. So we'll take a minute or 2 and before as we reset. But the moderator for this, if I can, introduce Dr. Heather Niente. Heather is faculty here at Dow. And I said, not has taken over, but has grown the courses John has taught. She's cross-appointed at two departments, psychology and neuroscience and industrial engineering. Heads the cognitive motor performance lab, which aims to improve human performance across a variety of domains, including, but not exclusive to, maritime defense, sport, and neuro rehab. As an alumna of Dalhousie Kinesiology, John McCabe, like many of us, got her started on human-centered design. So Heather, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. And again, thank you everybody for joining us here today. As Michael mentioned, John was really instrumental in showing me that you know, I entered kinesiology because I like sports and I thought I was going to go to med school. And then I found this whole other really cool career that I could really enjoy. So today for our student research pitch sessions, what the students have been asked to do is put together about a 3 to 4 minute pitch. And I'm going to ask our judges to come up now. Our judges are Shay Baelish, who's the CEO and co-founder of Curve AI. Also in the room, we have Justin Mulaney, who's the production development leader of Michelin North America. They're actually going to be sitting behind the computer that's showing the session, so they can evaluate the students' presentations, but you'll hear their voice. But also available online is Heather Butler, who's the research director at the Department of Anesthesia at Dalhousie. So online, you'll probably get to see her in the room. She'll be joining us through the iPad to ask questions. So first of all, I'm going to bring up Christopher Holland to do his research pitch. Chris is a PhD student in psychology and neuroscience. He has a Master's of Science in Kinesiology and also graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology from Dalhousie's programs. So Chris, I'll get you to get in the camera frame.
Sure thing.
And I should mention after the pitch sessions, we'll have 7-ish minutes of questions available for the panelists. And then we'll move on to the next session. So Chris, over to you.
Thanks.
Don't forget the iPad. I'll pick you here.
Yeah, I'll project as much as I can for sure. Or do you want me to hold it? I'm sure someone.
They're designed not to pick up.
Yeah, hold it.
Everybody's in a different direction.
Yeah, go for it. Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So I'm Chris. Nice to meet you all. Thanks. This is great. Perfect. So I'll get into my pitch here. So automation is taking over. We see it every day, more and more often. And the common theme showing up in a lot of fields is human automation teams, where automation will take over performing physical or repetitive tasks, and humans will take over a more observatory role, where they're making sure that the automation is doing the correct thing. So these teams, they have the potential to be highly effective because it requires fewer humans to perform the same amount of work. However, these teams aren't without limitations. So in human automation teams, when automation fails, typically this leads to a trust breakdown of the human observer. It'll lead the human to want to take on more of the work, performing more of the task, maybe overriding decisions that the automation is making. And this increases the workload of the user. This can eventually lead to human errors or potential faults in the system. So trust is a critical component of these types of systems. And research has shown that both overtrust and undertrust can actually lead to overall system degradation or performance degradation. One of the unanswered questions about these human automation teams is whether trust in a single agent can be carried over to other agents in the same system. So for example, in the case of self-driving cars, we've been talking a lot about that today. If a single self-driving car were to fail, do you suddenly distrust all self-driving cars or just that single car? Pulling on human-human interactions, we know that if you break trust between two humans, typically you don't suddenly distrust all humans. But it's not quite clear that this kind of thing would carry over to automation. So pulling in another example, if you were observing a team of turtle bots and you're making sure that they're doing the correct thing, if one of them were to fail, would you suddenly distrust all the turtle bots? How would that answer change if you knew that the turtle bots were also all receiving commands from the same autonomous system, right? Would you start to distrust all of them now, knowing that they're all more connected? Now, what happens if you were to introduce drones into this situation? So if you distrusted all the turtle bots, but you also had drones working collaboratively with them, would you distrust the drones as well? Or would they be exempt because they take on a different form and might be performing different tasks as well? So these are all questions I hope to answer in the following years through my research. Using a combination of virtual and practical robot simulations, I hope to test people in these environments to really understand how malleable trust in automation is and how much can be carried over from one potentially related system to another. By placing people in dynamic workload situations, it will be possible to see at what point they will opt to override decisions being made by automation, showing that potentially they no longer trust that system. The goal of any automation research is to increase the long-term performance of these systems. As it becomes more and more prominent in everyday life, it'll be critical that we understand how people react to it and how we can best implement it to minimize the potential for faults or negative outcomes. And this can be across a wide range of fields, anywhere from aviation, marine navigation and exploration, military applications, all the way down to more general purposes such as self-driving cars, assistive care monitoring systems, or home defense, home security. Perfect. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening. Hopefully I've intrigued you a little bit about human automation teams, and I'm excited to hear some of your questions.
We'll turn it over to our panel now. Heather, I can't see you, but we have somebody monitoring the computer. If you have a question, throw up your hand, and we'll get the signal here. But yeah, I'll turn it over to the panel for questions. Yeah, Justin.
That's all right. Thank you. Good job. Very good.
Thanks.
So what you're talking about is what I'm dealing with right now live, right? I'm looking at AGV, I'm looking at artificial intelligence for inspection of tires, right? And so what do you see so have you started the research already on some of this?
A little bit, yeah. So yeah, my focus is like more trust in automation.
Yep.
That's not necessarily defined by like the whole team aspect of it,
Yep.
but yeah.
So where do you see in terms of repeated, let's say, failure of an automation system, how many can you have before you lose trust within the system? So I have my experience with these systems as well. So
honestly, it's a great question. There's so many pieces to it that can answer that. So one being whether or not someone even notices that the system failed. There are lots of situations where the automation will just go on doing its thing, and you have no idea. And because of that, the human never distrusts that system. On the other hand, there's also a factor of what tasks you're doing. So in, I would say, more mundane or less high risk situations, there's a lot less of a trust breakdown when you see failures versus if you have very high risk situations, for example, like aviation, right? Like if your autopilot starts to fail, immediately like trust is broken and there's a good chance that they don't come back to it very easily without a good amount of training. So does that answer your question?
yeah, and once the trust, you said the amount of time. So in in my world, for example, I'll give you an example. We've had examples where, we've lost trust in whether it be, robotics or true in automation. And then it takes a long time for an operator or a group of operators to get back. Because for us, it's, why are you doing that, right? Why don't you just let the system do this? Well, I don't trust it. How long do you see does it take to rebuild that trust? So the trust has been lost, because in humans, it takes a little while, right? We talk about trust banks from, Brene Brown, and talk about the deposits and things like that. But how long does it take something where we can't have that interaction like a human would, right?
Yeah, no, great question. I'll pull on research that we've conducted recently, actually, and hopefully I'm not stealing from someone else's presentation, but it was with automation that we actually started at a fairly low reliability level. So it was inaccurate about 50% of the time. And over time, that automation actually got better to the point that it would eventually be 100% accurate. So it was kind of like a multiple trials and interaction kind of thing. What we found with that group of people that interacted with automation is that they never actually built trust with that automation, which is kind of surprising, because by the end of it, right, like you have literally perfect automation. You would hope that they'd be relying on it and they trust it in some capacity, but they just didn't. They had no interest in trusting that kind of thing. So it's really hard to answer these questions, right? Like I would say it's very circumstance specific, But also very hard to get people to want to retrust things, especially in situations where you don't, explain to them, how trust could be rebuilt or like how things have changed potentially too. So.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. All right.
Yeah, I have a quick question. This is great. It's something our company encounters every day. My question revolves around the goal of the system. So if the goal of the system is to produce a widget, for example, or sometimes there's many systems that the goal of the system is actually to influence the individual that's interacting with it. I'll give you an example. We're building a digital clinic. We have a health concierge. There was many financial reasons to build that as an automated chatbot, but one wrong message and you completely erode trust and the behavior change you would expect of guiding someone through a disability management process or guiding someone through a 14 low back pain rehab plan is kind of out the window. So variance as a function of the goal of this system, you see anything there?
I think I just want more clarification. What do you mean by goal system?
Yeah, so a system could actually be the goal of the system may be to impact the behavior change of the agent that's working, the human agent that's working with it, versus an automated system that's on a production line producing tires.
So I think that's kind of a little bit of what I was touching on, right? Now, like depending on what you're trying to achieve with the automation, it can be. You should be careful about how you introduce it to people almost. And I guess I'm just pulling off research that I've read about, specifically relating to self-driving cars too. In situations where you show them where the edge cases are for self-driving cars, people are a lot more inclined to want to trust them, as opposed to if you never show them those situations, they will blindly go into trusting them, but as soon as they fail, that trust breaks down very quickly. So I think that's kind of getting at what you're asking, I think.
Yeah, and on the same vein, would you find a lot of variance in trust based on the nature of the error? So it's completely random, unpredictable error versus something that's like intuitively understandable to a human officer.
Yeah, oh, definitely, yeah, for sure. Nature of error. In that if it's an error that's very obvious to a human that would be performing this task and you're like, that's clearly a mistake, that is like a huge trust drop off, as opposed to situations, and actually this is something that we try to control with some of our research too, situations where it's not so clear that it's necessarily a right or wrong answer and may just be a subjective determination of what they think could be. Those ones, it's a lot easier for people to maintain trust in the systems and also rebuild trust in the systems. So, yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for the. Okay, all right, so up next, we have Jackie Toner, who's a PhD candidate in health, which is very broad across the faculty, but she is in our Department of Kinesiology. And Jackie has a background in kinesiology, both master's and bachelor's from UNB, and she's previously done work with Irving before coming to Dow. Jackie is joining us from Windsor, avoiding driving home tonight in the middle of a hurricane. So Jackie, you're going to come through the iPad, so project your voice, and I'll turn it over to you. I have your slide up on the screen.
All right, perfect. I usually don't, for folks that do know me, I don't have a problem projecting. So if you can't hear me, then I'm very but thank you for having me here. I haven't spent a lot of time at Dalhousie, so I really appreciate this opportunity to even meet virtually. So hello, I'll virtually shake your hand. But I want to put this question out here for you folks. How many times have you lost your wallet or keys only to find them hours later? You would think that something so important and frequently used would just pop right out in front of us, but instead it just falls into the background and fades. What if I told you that the same could be said about everyday hazards workers see on their job site? Like I said, my name is Jackie Toner, a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Health, and I'm focusing on the development, testing, and evaluation of a hazard training that could effectively train our minds to see those hazards that have often faded into the background in our subconscious. On an international level, the construction industry is recognized as one of the most dangerous and hazardous workplaces. Within this particular industry, more than 50% of hazards often remain unidentified by workers, And up to 45% of injuries have been attributed to failures in our own personal hazard identification and assessment. Now, within Canada, I recently completed a nationwide survey on the topic of hazard identification and training in hopes to gain insight on how workers are being equipped to tackle this daily issue. Preliminary results indicated that approximately 1 in 5 construction workers do not receive any hazard identification training, and those who in fact do receive that training only found it on average between 55 and 85% of the time effective. Now, a potential mechanism to improve a worker's hazard identification is by improving the training they receive, more specifically now including a visual literacy component. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar, visual literacy training involves improving one's ability to perceive and understand their surroundings, using the principles of design such as line, shape, color, texture, and space. Visual literacy training has started to emerge through various industries, including construction, and it has been found that individuals have increased their ability to take in their surroundings and increase their overall visual field and abilities to take in contextual information. In order to evaluate a training that has these components of this visual literacy, what we'll be doing in the camp lab and for my dissertation, we'll be using eye tracking technology, and this will be used to explore potential relationships between what workers' eyes are targeting and if that actually corresponds to an actual hazard identification that they've indicated. Doing so will improve our understanding of the mind when assessing environments and hopefully cater to the impacts of search patterns when designing safety processes and training. Using these results, my research intends to close the gap for workers and offer them new skills that they are able to incorporate into their daily lives and increase their hazard awareness and recognition, giving them the tools that they can take on the job, not relying on different paperwork and different assessment modes, and instead using what they've learned to see objectively instead of subjectively, with the intention to lower their risk of workplace injury and death among hazards. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm standing beside you, holding you up to the audience. So
yes, this is very futuristic.
Yes. So I'll open up to the panelists for questions. Heather Butler, I would like to give you the opportunity to ask a question of Jackie there.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, and you are now also standing at the front of the stage.
Hi everyone. Really great presentation. Thank you very much. And yes, I could hear you clearly, Jackie. I just was, as indicated, I work in the health system, and a lot of our work has to do with looking at the differences between people. And in your research, I'm curious about, do you expect any kind of differences around diversity of factors? So for the different populations that may be involved with construction workers or other fields?
Absolutely. So a big one is the fact that construction is a male-dominated field, and those social influences is certainly something that, as society becomes more vocal and aware of toxic masculinity and different things that are impacting the individual and how that can translate into the workplace, absolutely. Someone might still identify hazards, but choose to engage with it based on the different perspectives and viewpoints that they have, or what they fear the influence might be from their coworkers. With this particular study that I'm proposing, it is because of the eye tracking and the nature of, like, I would love to do this research for like 10 years and be able to have like the most extensive thing. And that component is definitely there, and it's something that can't be avoided or disregarded. So although it's not a direct focus to be involved with the eye tracking research, instead really just trying to validate if this type of training is going to be effective to create a more objective view of an environment. If someone sees a hazard, that's the goal. Whether they choose to engage with it for other reasons, that's a second problem.
Great, thanks very much, Jackie. I'll turn it over to, yeah, Shane, thank you.
Great presentation, Jackie. Quick question, where are you getting the normative data to be able to label something as a threat versus not a threat within the workplace? Then I have a follow-up comment, I guess, after that.
Yeah, that is a great point. It's built into our protocol to really lean on industry specialists. So being able to do consultation work with companies, with health and safety professionals that know the job sites, they're going to know a hazard a lot faster than I will. And it could be very specific or very vague. And so it's really going to be involving different parties and essentially creating a library of images where we would have essentially a committee, a small cohort of individuals that would individually identify hazards in this kind of library of static 2D images. And then from there, kind of whittling it down to about 50 that we would involve in the actual eye tracking experimental design, but allow for both individual and group consultation to identify the hazards from like an industry standard perspective.
Very, very cool. So I come with a bias that I've left academia and in startups now. And so I've been involved in building, not necessarily, but overseeing and hiring people that can build machine learning models, in particular computer vision. And what my gut's telling me here is that this thesis could actually be a phenomenal opportunity to build this very complex, clean data set to perhaps even train a machine learning model computer vision system, which can be done quite cost effectively. And we may not even have to rely on training these hairless primates, these humans, to learn all these things. And there's many computer vision systems and cameras already being placed at work sites. So just a bit of a nudge to potentially look at maybe a more efficient path to market for a practical application. I think this could be a phenomenal data set that you end up with. So yeah, kudos to a really interesting thesis.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that there's definitely, if there's anything from the conversations we've been having today, there's this evolving use of automation in everyday industries, but in other ways, there's that balance where humans can't completely replace automation and vice versa. Realistically, what my kind of goal is, one, to provide training that is effective, and primarily to address a lot of residential companies or smaller companies. We had a range of folks communicate with us through the survey of the size of their company, whether they were unionized or not. And really, when there's no training whatsoever, if it's something that can be packaged and just be that little kind of tool that's not that like physical checkboard, it's kind of going to live with you and kind of reshape how you see the world and specifically see your job site. Because we might have cameras from like a large perspective, but when we're working on those really minute different interactions with whether it's chemicals, wiring, so on and so forth, those split-second reactions that a human might have to do, maybe, hopefully, those things can be initiated or avoided by just having a more objective view of your surroundings.
Great, thank you so much, Jackie. I'm going to set you down on the table now.
Gently, yeah.
Gently. So let's have a round of applause for Jackie. I'd like to introduce Grace Barnhart. Grace is a Master's of Kinesiology student. She also completed a Bachelor of Kinesiology at Dalhousie as well, doing an undergraduate research project. And during her master's, she's also completed an internship at Defense Research and Development Canada, the Atlantic branch. So Grace, I'll turn it over to you.
need to carry. Yeah. that's a little
I
bit.
think you should be okay as long as you project.
Perfect. And on screen, great. Okay, so when an automated system fails, who is at fault? Is it the engineers that designed it, the technicians that built the hardware or coded the software, or maybe it's the operator at the time of failure? The answer is not one of these entities, but a combination of them all. And accidents can only occur when errors pass through all of the contributing layers. My research examines the last layer, where operators are typically tasked to monitor automated systems, recognize failures or abnormalities in their environment, and then intervene to prevent accidents. But when more of their workload is handed over to an automated system and the operators step back and focus on the big picture, they're less aware of what's happening in that environment. And in that lower level of awareness, it's challenging to recognize when they need to intervene or to be able to do so efficiently. This is captured in a trade-off between situational awareness and workload. The more engaged someone is in a task, the more aware they are of what's happening, but they have a high workload. We can hand some of that work over to an automated system, but this is at the cost of their situational awareness. So I'm interested in how we can exploit autonomous capabilities without compromising awareness. And one approach is to promote a really high level of awareness at the beginning of a task, so an operator can anticipate changes in the environment and then direct their attention at the time and location where new information is expected to be available. And this would continue in a cycle to keep their awareness high. Since engagement in a task increases awareness, I'm investigating whether increasing workload in the planning phase affects an operator's ability to monitor an automated system. To evaluate this, I have participants complete a simulation where they are monitoring remote uninhabited vehicles that are traveling through a changing environment. They watch the vehicle's progress, similar to the screen shown here, and if they're going to enter an unsafe area, which would be designated in the gray areas, they stop their path. In some of the trials, the path for each vehicle is planned automatically, and in other trials, the participants take on some of that planning responsibility. Throughout the simulation, we evaluate the perceived workload, their situational awareness, and their performance, and we're using iMetrics to see how they allocate their visual attention and whether visual strategies change across changing levels of awareness. And through this research, we'll learn more about how initial workload affects somebody's situational awareness and ability to monitor automated systems. And this will inform industries including defense, maritime, aviation, and warehouse operations, and how to reduce human error by creating technology that supports humans rather than replaces them. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Grace. I will open it to the panel for questions.
So I got one. So do you see with your initial research, there's a trade-off, sort of a crossing point where we move from, I'll say, total disengagement to actual still or engagement within the process?
Between
the situational awareness. So I'm very aware, I have good workload, so I'm gonna help, I'll say I'm really engaged in it, to where I have no awareness. And now I'm, I'm almost thinking in a quadrant type of style where I'm kind of almost disengaged now, where I don't really know what's gonna.
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't started data collection yet, but some of the other students here helped me pilot that, and then noticed within the study, they're like, oh, now that I'm taking on more of this planning, I seem to understand what's happening and can complete the task a little bit better. And they're more engaged in trying to do better in the task and improve their performance. But the goal is to kind of optimize that amount of work that the human can take on in order to the automated systems do the repetitive parts, as Chris mentioned. But the human will still be aware enough and engaged enough to be able to intervene and make kind of key decisions like ethical decisions or to override the autonomous capabilities. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Heather, I can kind of see you. Do you want to ask a question or?
Yeah, hi, great presentation. Thank you very much. I just have a quick question. Did you say the simulation was a driving simulation? Not a driving simulation. So there are just it's at the robots that they'd be moving through a area. So they just see like a grid square, and then they would imagine the robots are following that path in a remote location. Okay. Nope. That was it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Shay, do you have anything?
I was this isn't too much of a digression, but I was wondering if there's any type, there's a whole field in psychology of priming studies, and a lot of them haven't been replicated very well. But there seems to be at least some evidence, and I was wondering if there's any type of insight that could be gleaned from priming someone, perhaps even emotionally, before they engage in the task that may help optimize some of the workload and awareness that's occurring. It's more of an exploratory question.
Yeah, like letting them know that the automation isn't perfect, or it's like level of.
Or maybe even artificially suggesting that the costs of the outcome of this is higher than they actually are, or whatever type of other constraints we want to place on them to put them in the right state, perhaps by doing so emotionally.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll hear from Sierra later, but I did my honors in an underwater mine detection task. And some people were very concerned. They're like, what happens if I don't find the mine? And they were trying really hard, whereas other people, knew that it was a safe mission and didn't really care so much to find them. But the people that were concerned about what would actually happen definitely were engaged more so in the task.
Great. Thank you very much, Grace. So next up, we have Ben Rittenberg, who's a Master's of Science student in kinesiology. He also completed his Bachelor of Science in kinesiology. And Ben, I'm just going to place the mic a little bit more optimally, and then I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Launch angle, club head speed, club path, attack angle, dynamic loft, and smash factor. Whoa. These are only 6 of the 40+ variables that TrackMan, a piece of radar technology that is commonly used in the golf environment, measures. This begs the question for coaches and athletes alike: what do these variables mean, and how do I use all of them? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Rittenberg, and I am currently a Master's in Kinesiology student at Dalhousie University studying sports psychology. I'm here today to talk generally about technology in sport, but more specifically about how the attitudes of coaches and athletes influences their use of technology. As you can very clearly see by the image on the screen, technology has become a popular and important resource that can help athletes improve their performance. In fact, our group's research has shown that 97% of PGA coaches actually use technology in their training and instruction. And our group has looked at some of the factors that influence technology usage. And importantly, we found that trust in technology does predict technology use in sport. And we found that in golfers and coaches. And in coaches, we found that trust in technology also mediates the relationship between self-confidence in one's coaching ability and technology use. So as with other human factors research, it seems that trust in technology is highly important. But other factors, such as the use of a coach by golfers, skill level, and self-regulated learning, have also been shown to influence technology use. Why does any of this matter? Why do we care about these factors? Well, us as researchers are trying to figure out how to appropriately use technology in the training environment. We've repeatedly seen that technology can be used to improve performance in sport through both coach feedback and personal athlete use. But it's also been shown that information that distracts a learner from their own error detection mechanisms can undermine their ability to learn and retain information. So if coaches and athletes are relying on technology too much, the learning and retention of the performer may suffer. Now things get even more interesting when we start talking about the differences between practice and competition environments. So again, take golf, for example, a sport where technology is used frequently in practice, yet is not allowed at major competitions. So if an athlete is becoming too reliant on feedback they're receiving from technology in their practice, they may experience decreases in performance or self-confidence once entering competition. So as we move forward with this research, we'll be experimentally manipulating golfers into technology and coach use conditions to determine effects on performance and retention. This research will help determine how to appropriately use technology in golf while opening doors to this type of research in other areas of sport. Thank you very much for listening and having me.
Very much, Ben. I'm going to start with you now.
Again, just an exploratory question. what types of, I think you mentioned that you're looking at some interventions to induce trust. What are you looking at? And like intuitively, like, what do you think is actually going to work?
Yeah, so we're gonna split athletes off into 4 separate conditions. So there's like a technology only, coach only, and then combinations of one present, not present. So, and then from that, we're gonna measure their trust and kind of their learning outcomes and performance outcomes from that. So just seeing how feedback from, I mean, ultimately we want to see, we know what coach feedback does, but how does that change when we put a piece of technology into that space? How does that influence how someone learns? Does the coach rely on that technology too much? Are we giving athletes variables like smash factor and not telling them what it is? Because I have no idea what that is. I've looked at it and I've used the piece of technology. So are we taking away from the feedback that we're giving to our athletes by putting this piece of technology in the training environment?
Right. So really trying to operationalize the outcomes, like the knowledge transfer, to make it as human as possible so it can be adjusted.
Yeah,
exactly.
Heather, I see your hand up there.
Hi, thank you. Great presentation. Little different kind of question here. I'm interested in your thinking around the application of this research. So you talked about coaches and golfers. So would these this research could be applied to those with disability, or just yeah, with disability? Is that something that this could generalize to?
Yeah, I think about applications in the healthcare setting, and using technology where we like you said, with disability, I mean, the clinics, physiotherapy clinics, that where we're trying to rehabilitate injuries and teach, and we have all these feedback mechanisms that we give and cues, but now we're introducing another piece into that, and how can that help rehabilitate injuries? And so I think of applications in the healthcare setting, if that answers your question there.
So just a follow-up question, are you looking at like healthy golfers, or are you introducing a different sample in your research that would include disabled golfers?
So this would just be for healthy golfers. I think there is, yeah, you're right, there might be an application to disabled golfers as well, golfers that are trying to rehabilitate injuries too. But I think right now our focus is healthy golfers. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, we do have a minute for another
Okay,
question.
perfect.
Yeah, so.
Great presentation. As you were talking about this, the first thing that came back, and I think Shay, you'll remember this back in one of our labs, learning to juggle.
Yeah.
Remember that, right? And so this is like now that was back in like 2003 or something, and or 2006, I should say. And this is like now the extreme version of like feedback. So and talking about the feedback loops, and what do you see? So you talked about how there can be a performance degradation because of reliance on this. Do you see anything where there's key indicators that they should be focused on, right? So for example, if all indicators are important, nothing's important, right? Are you guys extracting out what are the key pieces that facilitate attainment of learning?
Yeah, I think that's like right now we're looking at mainly how it's, one, if it's used, two, how it's used. So I think that is a future step of looking at what pieces of information are actually being extracted and what cues. I know from a golf perspective, some of the common ones are like that launch angle, club head speed. Those are predictors of high performance. So I guess those would be some of those initial cues. And like I said, there's 40 or more variables that TrackMan spits out now. So I think you see some coaches that are focusing on those cues that we know that affect performance and affect learning appropriately. And then there's probably coaches that are using variables that, okay, see how high we can get this. Well, what does that mean from a mechanics point of view, performance point of view? I think that side of things is still unknown. And I think that's why there's so many avenues to go from this, just because so many variables that can be measured now. That answers your question.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. Last up, we have Sierra Bedros. Sierra is in her third year of her undergrad in biology and psychology and neuroscience, but yet she still has an extensive research background where she's already done research on, which kind of came up earlier, underwater mine detection, as well as the effects of exercise and stress on cognition. But she's now going to completely talk about a different topic today. So I'll hand it over to Sierra now.
Hi. So robots are currently expanding the places that humans can go and the things that we can do, from completely navigating the surfaces of other planets to investigating battlefields to see if they're safe for humans to travel. Human-controlled robots are becoming increasingly used in many industries to improve human safety and performance. So in these dangerous to human conditions, it's often the case that the operator is controlling the robot from a secondary and safe location, and this is teleoperation. For effective teleoperation to occur, there needs to be bidirectional communication between that robot and the commander. And one of the ways that this communication occurs is through haptics. So haptic feedback can be as simple as like the alerting vibration of your cell phone all the way to a self-turning autonomous car wheel. And it can be used on its own, but it's most often used in conjunction with other factors such as visual or audio feedback. And then in this bidirectional system, the user also is communicating with the robot by some sort of movement. So often it's a joystick that you're directing where the robot's moving in the environment or what the robot is doing. So it has been found that when haptics are added to visual, it improves the ability of navigating a robot through an environment. And this has been seen to decrease navigation time and number of collisions without a significant impact on the cognitive load of the user. It's also been found in much more complex haptic tasks, such as surgical teleoperation, that haptics can improve your immersion in a task, as well as your remembrance of where obstacles or objects are located. However, this has only been tested in absolutes, where conditions are perfect, and that doesn't really reflect this situation that's dangerous to humans, where maybe we have a time lag between the robot, or it's dark and we can't see everything in the environment, or maybe we lose a sensor. So we're looking at investigating how this feedback is used and how they're used together, and maybe when we lose a little bit of visual information, or maybe our haptic feedback isn't working quite perfectly. So to investigate this, we're partnering with the Dalhousie Advanced Controls and Mechatronics Laboratory, and our participants will be using a haptic device, like the one in the bottom right corner here, to navigate through multiple simulated environments with a virtual robot. So very simple ones pictured on the screen, from a set start point, which would be the square, to a set end point, which would be the circle. So they're going to do this with some feedback from their robot. So in some cases, they'll have haptic feedback where the haptic device is going to exert a controlled force if they approach an obstacle to push them away. And they'll also have some visual feedback. So they're always going to know where the obstacles are in the location, but in some of our conditions, we're not going to tell them where the robot is. So maybe there's a time lag and it's not showing up on time, or maybe it's really dark. You can't see where the robot is, but you know where the map is. So that'll give us 4 conditions where we're varying on haptic and robot location. And based on prior research, we're kind of expecting to find that this haptic is going to improve our ability to navigate without a significant increase in the cognitive load. And that potentially that benefit is going to be seen even when we lose a little bit of the visual feedback. This is super beneficial for developing robots and haptics that are used in real world situations, other than developing ones that are for the situations that we find in our labs. So we can create robots that are more effective and have better performance without increasing the workload that's required from the operator. And this can be used with little turbobots in construction sites, all the way to big manipulator robots that are pipe fitting underwater. That's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I have a quick question
Yeah.
about the variance in the effectiveness of the haptic feedback around how the user's actually engaging with that feedback, or I guess sensing that feedback, whether it could be a smartwatch or a ring or on the joystick controller. Is there any, perhaps you haven't done this research, but any assumptions around how the variance in effectiveness might change as a mechanism or a function of the way they're receiving the feedback?
So from some of the reading that I've done, haptic feedback hits a point where it needs to be strong enough that you can consistently detect it, even if you're not especially focusing on it, especially with like alerting with your smartwatches or vibrations and stuff like that. But you also don't want it to get too strong that frankly gets annoying. Like you don't want your watch vibrating so much it's shaking your whole arm. So I think that is also kind of being controlled for in our experiment. So we have controlled the force that's being applied, and so it's going to be within a set range and it's proportional to the velocity that you are moving it at. So it's kind of just going to be like you're putting it in and it's going to push back, and that's typically what's used. And I guess we'll see when we try it out how that works with participants.
Very interesting. Quick comment that I met a startup when I spent some time in Kansas City that was former NASA scientists that were building a watch that used haptic feedback to create a new language, effectively, or communicate as like a high information bandwidth language, was actually a building for the military. And supposedly haptic feedback you can actually have, again, very high informational bandwidth, and you can have a full conversation or gain a lot of information while you're engaged in other tasks where your situation awareness may be occupied. So really interesting study.
Heather, I'm looking at you there. Do you have any questions? No, you're good, Justin.
Yeah, I got one question. From the research you've done so far and reading, is there a point where the haptic feedback can actually be detrimental? For example, that exposure to it over time, does that, so for example, think of my cell phone, right? How many times I'm at work and I'm thinking my phone's ringing, I'm constantly just hitting it, but it's not doing anything. Is there kind of a point of no return, I guess, where that could happen?
It is possible. I'm not quite sure what's out there, but there's independence that can be developed.
Yeah.
So we're introducing this haptic and we're hoping to improve performance. If we take it away, does the performance go down? That's definitely something that could be possible. I don't really know anything about that yet, though.
Great, thank you, Sierra. Do is just invite all the student presenters up again, and the panelists have had great opportunity to ask questions, but I would also like to open it up to the audience if you have a question for any of our student presenters.
Yeah. Yeah. So what role do controls play in developing that trust, like the system controls?
So can you be more specific about like controls, like joysticks or like buttons? Where are we
No,
talking about?
like controls that make sure that it produces the outcome that you're looking for.
Are you talking about more like software side of things, of like, oh, like what we designed it to do?
What alerts do you have that something? That
Oh yeah. Good question. I mean, it totally depends on how you want to design a system. I'm not as familiar with that field. I did do a little bit of readings on, I guess, yeah, how you present warnings to people, which can have an effect on how they perceive the information. I mean, the exact specifics of it slips my mind a little bit, but there are for sure like situations where if you chose a certain way to inform someone, they might not actually interpret as a critical kind of situation, and vice versa too, right? Like it's possible to be like, hey, like this is like something you should pay attention to, and they disregard it. Especially in the case where you have those kind of warnings show up potentially too frequently. I mean, there are tons of examples throughout history where that's happened already in our short lifetimes, right? Like where warnings were kind of disregarded, and eventually that led to some kind of system failure that was catastrophic. So. Definitely a good consideration in any automation. So.
A quick one. Love to hear you chime into the complexity chat soon. This one's for Jackie. Jackie, is it?
Yeah, Jackie. Jackie, are you with us?
Oh yeah. If you talk, Jackie, you'll come back up on screen.
Okay, I'm here.
Yeah, so question about, construction, this is interesting in Nova Scotia, that construction has a lower injury rate than healthcare. And in healthcare, where people can actually be the hazards. So rather than a fixed hazard, these are dynamic hazards that people recognize patterns to then take some type of, mitigating behavior. It'd be interesting to see as it evolves, how does it go from fixed hazards that are known to kind of knowable hazards that are dynamic.
Did you catch that, Jackie?
I got the explanation. I'm just want clarification verbally on the actual question.
Fixed hazards, which would be more typical in construction versus dynamic hazards, which you might see more in healthcare. How could that be translated?
Yeah, well, I think one thing to note is, yes, I think if we could easily put on a list all the different hazards that are in certain industries like construction. I think one thing that's very unique with that particular industry that kind of makes it that dynamic, have a different kind of dynamic sense to it, is that it's always evolving. The project is always constantly changing. Different crews are coming in, which is very similar to healthcare. You have different specialists, different teams, different cohorts involved. And that trade-off can be really challenging. And not everyone's going to be on the same page. So I do think that while we might also look to other industries, there are unique things about construction that make it increasingly dynamic than what we might see on paper. In terms of the healthcare, it's also like, in terms of statistics, especially in workplace health and safety, it's reported statistics. And so when we think about the construction industry as well, because it is so male dominated, there's going to be there might be more injuries than we know of. So although it might not be kind of number one on that list, it could be greater than we know. But to kind of get back to the question at hand in terms of the healthcare and the dynamic, I think that with this particular experiment, since we're going to be doing like a two-dimensional static image, there are limits in that sense. Movement is a huge component of a lot of eye tracking research that's really starting to emerge. It's its own separate beast and kind of uses different variables. And I think that whether it's looking instead of like at the color of something or the size or trying to figure out the material, instead it's looking at people's facial expressions. Can you determine the emotion of a patient and what that could interact with? Because we do know a lot of kind of patient violence and things like that as being a huge hazard in healthcare, aside from maybe having potentially prolonged standing or prolonged sitting, other kind of issues and injuries that can occur in a more kind of less physically demanding workplace. But yeah, looking at those different characters, what makes it different? You might not be dealing with like asbestos, or at least hopefully not if you're in a healthcare facility. But looking at behavior and looking at traits, how can you assess that? Obviously, we have a lot of that in human automation as well, in terms of reading someone's expression, and then kind of where we can go from there. So maybe teaming up with automation with that to kind of help read the room with kind of things that would evolve or change over time. But definitely a complicated question. Movement's a key factor, emotions are a key factor, and just a completely different setting.
Great. Thank you, Jackie. Any other questions? Oh, John.
People looking here at trust, how do you separate out trust in the device, trust in the people who maintain the device, versus trust in the management who say and use the device?
I'll do it. Really great question. Actually, I would love to explore this more too, because even with go back to self-driving cars, this is one before. Trusting the device versus trusting like the brand, for example. So Tesla, we're all familiar with, right? A lot of people would like to associate them as being a trustworthy, reputable company, right? Because it's a self-driving car and they've had a decent amount of experience. If you took the same software, put that into a car that was not Tesla-based, would you still trust it as much? So there's definitely a question there about, like what other factors are contributing to this trust, right? Like is Tesla as the brand name part of what adds into that trust factor? Or is it just the software on like the physical aspect? Is that what you're getting at there?
Well, except that you're choosing to buy that product and use the technology, whereas the person working in the factory is being charged to use that device.
Definitely.
And then they lose trust in the device.
Yeah.
So who or what have they lost trust in?
Yeah, I would say, at least from my knowledge, it's more often trust in the automation itself. I think, like, I imagine there is a multi-factor component to all of this, and that, right? Like, if your managers buy the cheapest software product for you, right, you're not gonna trust your managers, but I think to a certain extent, that would be, you'll have separate levels of trust for each of those, right? If you were to ask them, hey, do you trust your bosses in being confident at choosing the right software for you, versus do you trust the software that you're actively using, I think they would answer those questions differently.
I'm actually going to redirect to Grace and cue you to some of the previous research that you did as well.
My honors.
Yes.
Through that, we know that people that can be more trusting in general. So we always take an initial measure of their ability to trust people. And then in our trust measure, we break that down further into what component they're trusting through the automation. So their single trust score, sometimes it's just you trust this automation, sometimes an amalgamation of many questions that evaluate how you would trust it. Question mark.
What about when you also put human advisor as well?
Yeah. Yes, so in my honors, we did research about somebody that would have advice for both an automated system and a human. With Shayla and Octon had initially done it just with the automated system, and then we brought in that human advisor to see if that would alter how they trusted them. So we gave advice, and we said this one is from an automation, this one is from a human, and then we flipped it to see how they would respond. And when people think that people didn't trust the automation any different across the different studies, but their trust in a human varied a lot, which was interesting because we were manipulating the accuracy of the automated system.
One second on that for 1 sec from my point of view is we have this trust in the coach as well. So things that I'm thinking about are if we have in the training environment, if we have a coach and a piece of technology, and the technology is telling me all these things and all these metrics, and then I go out and play poorly, who's the blame on? I think that's something we're gonna look at. It and answer for you, but that's another application of okay, well, am I gonna get pissed at my coach or the technology or itself? Those are I think it's kind of along the lines of what you're talking about there.
Right, well, thank you all very much for great presentations and great discussion. Over to Michael.
Yeah, that's nothing. Thank you so much. We're just going to take a break. That's all I had to announce.
Okay, I guess
Yeah.
I just didn't want to steal your thunder.
No, that's fine. This is the thunder stealer. Yeah, so if we come back to you 10 minutes, yeah, we'll get started again. Thank you to our judges and presenters and those who asked questions as well. Cheers.
For those of you online, we're just going to briefly mute. We'll keep the video on, but we'll see you all in about 10 minutes.
Daniel, can you change seats? I don't need you there.
You guys are on mute in the room. We can't hear you. Whatever your comeback was for Darren.
It wasn't very good, Leslie. Look at them struggling.
Okay.
How are we doing now?
Leslie, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me
Brilliant.
okay?
We can hear you fine. All right, the last panel is more of a, well, virtual fireside chat on managing complexity. Our moderators, Daniel McCabe. Daniel graduated kinesiology 97. Has John to thank as inspiring his career choices while not actually working directly with John on any research. Daniel.
I think, yeah, thanks, Mike. It's a big deal for everybody in this room to be here. Like it's amazing to see the continuity of John's influence, and you catch different eyes and faces in the room, and it kind of takes you back to different points. And it connected with Mike, your point about it's kind of like a family, and John's like this cool uncle, right? And cooler than you knew, and cooler than I knew. It's interesting. I was just chatting with people here, and the influence that John's had on folks. Like I'm just going to call on Justin for a second, because out of every story, Justin, can you share a little bit about your road trip? You know.
So I'm where we're at now with Mission, because it all started with John. So I'll back up. It's around Christmas, before Christmas break. I'm waiting in class like every morning. John will come in and talk to you after class. So I need help. Would you like to get a job?
But I'd like to get
Yeah,
a job.
yeah. I'm 30 years young. I would love to have a job. And yeah, Michelin's. Oh yeah, and you know, she told me some stories. So he arranged everything, and so he said, "All right, we're gonna go down." And so we're gonna go down. And so he said, yeah, we're gonna. So we got this car and we drove to Pitcher County and we walked in. And so I started arranging and Paul, and so they knew John because John also had Matt Ross that had got the job, same thing. I was succeeding Matt, and so I went into the interview, and John came in, sat down, and I was like, "Oh, this is different. I've never had someone join me." Or in my other head, I was like, "Oh no, this is now a three-prong attack here." And so I remember the questions asking. I remember being ready to go look at my resume. I remember just ready to speak, and John was, "Oh yeah, that's." And he answered. I think I only answered one question. And it was my name. And I remember leaving and like, oh, okay, yeah. And so it was right after they shut down for Christmas, and right after I got hired on as the ergonomist working there. And I tell that story off because it means a lot to me what John did. But yeah, I'm 14 and a half years at the company that I've traveled the world. I've lived in another country because of that company, and the values that John, the principles that John is talking, I carry into everything that I do today as now a production manager managing 200 people, and it goes to that. So thank you.
And Stephen, very similar in terms of John's support and guidance, and that you talked about that the picture on your screenshot or on your desktop. And John, you know, he called you about the job as well. You know, it's amazing. Like, I'm just curious, how many people got jobs because of John? This is what you're missing out.
I wouldn't blame him for my career. That's for sure.
So it's just pretty magnificent. And the thing, I have two really cool people with on this panel, and Ray McNeil. I'm not going to share how they got here. I'll ask them to do that. And Leslie Fountain as well. Two people really impacted by John in terms of their path and where they are. And so perhaps Leslie, I'll start with you and just ask that question about, you know, if you could share some of John's influence and a bit about how that influence impacted your path to where you are today.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about just how I'm having to be here remotely and I can't actually physically be with you guys. Air Canada, of course, canceled my flight, which is why I'm not there. And just thinking about conversations we had before this session, and one things I was talking about is we really need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And John taught me that. And I don't know if you guys remember, I mean, Jamie Mallon and Darren McDonald, you were in my class. I think one of the earlier classes I had with John McCabe, we're sitting in class, he walks in and all of a sudden he just drops to the floor. Everyone's looking around, what's going on? What's he doing? Now, I can't remember what he was talking about, but I'll never forget that feeling. And it was really about getting uncomfortable and really helping us be brave, right? To really try new things, to experiment. And I felt he had such this wonderful humanity to make us feel safe to try new things, to make us feel safe to make mistakes and learn and grow. And this is so important, I think, for me in my own career, but also in where we are today. And all this sort of uncertainty we see in the world, not only with COVID, but just politically. So he brought me that, the idea to be brave, the idea to be human and create psychological safety for anyone you work with, whether it be in your job or at home. And something that I won't talk too much about because I know Ray wanted to touch on, but also this real deep curiosity. And because of that, I started out in sports science, moved into ergonomics, and now here I am. I manage a product and service design team around the globe. And that's thanks to many professors at Dow, but really some of these things around bravery and humanity and curiosity is what I'm grateful to John McCabe and the human factors industry.
Thanks, Leslie. Who was talking about the library?
Yeah.
Charles, yeah. As soon as you mentioned that, this image came into my mind, and John got me interested in a couple of things. One around the idea of systems, right? Didn't really understand what that was before. And chatting with him a little bit about that, he's like, here, come on, I'll show you some things. So he took me into the library and he started grabbing those books as you talked about. It's just fresh in my mind, and it's opening up the various books, different pages, the research on the go at that time. And I was, pretty impressed by that. I didn't really know him that well at that time. So I found it like a really big honor that he took that time to share with me what he knew. So he said, take the books. So I took the books, and I was at the grad house, the one that they tore down. It's somewhere around this area. You folks will remember it. And it was a real slushy, rainy day that it was freezing rain, and it was really messy, Nova Scotia mess. And I slipped, and all the books went flying out of my backpack, all into the slush, like, that dark slush. And I was feeling like, ooh, this is not good for business at all. Went back to the grad house. There's a small little bathroom in the back. Try to open up all these books, but they're massive, like tomes. Got back to my apartment, spread them all out, opened them up, have them hanging from ropes and things like that. And I was kind of almost like ashamed to bring them back. And then as I did the next day, try to dry them out, they're all kind of crinkly and, putting weights on them and things. And John's like, no big deal. Don't worry about it. What you learn. I'm going to bring Ray into this conversation. Ray, maybe a similar question to Leslie about, the influence of John of like, how did you get to here? It's what kind of stands out along the way.
I was waiting to hear what you learned. Wear winter boots. Carry a bag, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Always a practical.
Well, it's an honor for me to be here to celebrate John. I have a good story about him. It's not. I laugh when I say it. It's not particularly funny, I guess, but John and I was his only grad student for a lot of years. So the lab was kind of our secret space, and coffee was an hour, 2 hours long. And we talk about my thesis, which we did for a long time before it finally got written. But the coffee was the thing for him and I. And we just sit around, and I hated baseball, so he'd talk about baseball. I hated basketball, so he'd talk about basketball, and then he'd let me throw a few things in. But one of the things we always did was, and this is lost on people who don't know John, because he had this laugh that it was a kind of a full body laugh almost. When you really struck a chord with him, you could get this really good laugh, and it would make everybody around him laugh. So I would always try to come in with a few jokes Monday and Tuesday morning if we had a chance to get together. And for the life of me, I never figured out what made him laugh, because I would, on the weekend, I'd hear a joke and I'd think, oh, wait till Monday morning. Oh my God, this is going to be awesome. And so he will sit down and he'll say, you got a joke or anything? I said, I heard a great one. Okay, give it to me. So I tell him the joke, and at the end he'd go, yeah. You know, he does that. In other words, like, you're full of shit, right? Yeah.
The joke was on that.
That's good. Yeah, exactly. And then you'd come in on a Monday or Tuesday morning and you'd think, I got nothing. I got nothing. So he'd say, you got a joke? I said, well, I heard this one. It's not very good. Knock, knock. Anyways, the joke would go on and he would laugh, and you'd get that big chest laugh out of him. And it was, I never figured it out. All my best material was wasted on him, or he was punking me or something. I don't know what it was. Anyways, we had some really amazing times. Obviously, I learned a lot too. And I guess what Leslie was leaving for me to speak to a little bit, I guess, was this sort of insane curiosity that he had, which I found really attractive. When I was a kid, I used to drive my mother crazy because I'd say, why? Well, because, well, why? But why? And she'd kick me out of the house. And that was what John and I did a lot of. And he was happy to sit and, well, but why does it work like that? Well, what do you think about, well, I don't know, just this amazing back and forth for hours at a time. But that was, I didn't go to him because of that, but when I realized the kind of person he was, and again, this curiosity just for everything that was going on around him. And I think that I shared that with him. That was a really significant part of my time with John. I think I brought that to the table too, but he inspired that in me, which I spent 26 years with the provincial government. I have to say that curiosity sort of stunted my career a little bit, if you know what I mean. But it still was a really important part of my career, as was my training. And we might be able to talk a little bit about that if anyone's curious, because I'm sort of odd man out here. People found their niche within the human factors world largely. But my work with John was around human decision making. And I got very interested in, I guess, Gary Klein's work around naturalized decision making, if any of you know that work. That's the part I got really interested in. And that was very helpful for me in my work in government. And actually, my work in government, it was sort of like a petri dish, really, what it was for me. Because, as I say, I was fascinated by public policy and by all the influences within the public policy system and how that actually works. It's not how you think it works. It actually works quite differently. And it depends who's in the system too. But so there's a method to my madness, but my career in government for me was self-indulgent in that sense, in that they paid me to do stuff, but I was really curious about how humans make decisions and how they cooperate and don't cooperate and all of that stuff. So yeah, John was a major influence on my life, but also on my career.
Although we have different cohorts in this room, like Mike pointed out, past, present students, past, present faculty, we kind of have that family, and it's always, you ever hear of that, like imposter syndrome? So 80% of people all the time feel like they don't belong, right? But 80% do when you think it's yourself, right? So I think of the student, you folks who are learning new concepts that are actually relevant today and to tomorrow. A lot of the folks that are not in your position would love to be there. In fact, Jen's here, my partner, and I wonder if I can go back to school, like Heather, maybe. Like the concepts you speak of are really attractive because it's starting to integrate a lot of the things were very siloed in the past. I see Shay here. I mean, your story about John, senior, basketball. I don't know if you want to share that little bit there, but it was pretty powerful.
Yeah, I can, I guess. John was a phenomenal mentor. A lot of these things are already said. In some ways, that is part of the job of being a professor. But one thing that John did, for me in particular, was really bet on me when he shouldn't have. And I think we all have people in our careers that you look back and you go, "Fuck, thinking, right?" Yeah, that time. I was a rural kid from a divorced low-income family. Second year playing basketball, I think I had a 2.1 GPA, whatever was keeping me in, just enough so I could play basketball, or at least play left bench on the basketball team. And I decided I wanted to do an honors, and I didn't have to go. And maybe my coach recognized I was struggling at the time, and John was a sports psychologist. So I said, take a look at that kid from the South Shore. Maybe he needs a chat or two. And so John was excited. We met, we did an independent study. We mainly talked about whatever it was, sports, world events, mainly contrarian ideas, because he knew I had this contrarian streak in me a little bit, and took me on to do an honors when I did not even come close to have the marks to do so. And not that I've done extremely well, but I went on, and I don't want to blame him for my career. Like you said, I did a PhD in health management, philosophical culture at UT, and fell in love with academia before I fell in love and started a startup. But John clearly is the top of my list of people who bet on me, but rationally they probably shouldn't have, and I think it genuinely changed my life. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
That's a great story.
Daniel, can I interject? Because I think that's something really wonderful that I think John really does for us. And it's around the curiosity, but and around this, the idea of psychological safety, is that he allows us to be open to what emerges for us. And in fact, he helps open things up that we might not, he makes the invisible visible for us to start going, hey, there's something here I never thought it was possible before. And I think that's really important for all of us, regardless of where you go in your careers and who you work with. And that's really beautiful to actually allow us to see paths or go down places we never thought we would have before. And it's so pertinent to today as well, and what's happening in the world today.
Can I just add something that I think will take us into the conversation we're supposed to eventually have? The other thing, when Leslie and I were having this conversation about John and about what he meant to us, the other thing that struck me was, and I guess this is for the students in the room, at the time, John was the statistical consultant for the department. And so we spent a fair bit of time talking about statistics. And that actually put me in good stead in the government, because I never really came upon someone who understood statistics at the level that I understood it at. I don't mean I knew lots of statistics. I mean, I understood how they worked. And that was John's thing. And I remember him many, many times saying, Ray, listen, anybody can run a statistic. What does it mean? Right? It's the statistical significance from the practical significance. And I've had that conversation in my 26-year career so many times inside the government, where people see a statistically significant result and they just say, oh, well, then we have to do this. Well, hang on a second. Let's talk about those variables. Let's talk about what they mean. How do you think they're related? Well, there's this significant relationship. Well, Wade Blanchard, if some people in faculty here know Wade at the Math and Statistics, he was the statistic consultant at the time when I was doing my thesis. And he said something also I never forgot. He said, listen, Ray, if you want statistical significance, you just got to give me enough subjects. I'll give you statistical significance. And that's another thing to remember about significance testing. Anyways, that was another thing that really, in a very practical terms for me, that was something really simple that John gave me that I never forgot, and I practiced my entire career. So that's if you haven't learned that lesson already, that's a really good lesson to learn if you're in a field where there's math and statistics or anything like that. So
sort of connects back to the data. What does the data, what does it actually tell us? What does it really represent? You're talking about the stats. So John's statistician, right? Cognitive ergonomist, or from a psychological industrial psych perspective. We heard sports psychologist, human performance and optimization. Decision making, yeah. It's like a chameleon, you know. Talk about statistical anomalies. Like you had 26 years in government with that attitude.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, they couldn't fire me, I guess. Once I realized they couldn't fire me, then sort of bet was off then.
Yeah.
It took me about 15 years to figure that out, but once I realized I was quite liberated to do a lot of interesting things.
It's interesting. The 80% that I told you, we always feel like we're an imposter. The other 20% are sociopaths. So we're all in. Anyway, let's get back on this track here, I think. So the point of this panel was to open up a little bit of a conversation, get some different perspectives, and to start with some concepts of complexity. I think, Ray, we're gonna can start us off building a little bit of a platform around some of the concepts that you've come across or that are meaningful to you, and then we'll start a little bit of a conversation as it goes through those in the room and those online.
Okay, Leslie, jump in or cut me off or anything if I'm going too far, okay? I really enjoyed the first session and the student sessions, by the way, but there was a whole bunch of touch points in there that we won't get to. But a colleague of mine in the UK, Dave Snowden, because we're talking about AI. Oh, so there's another place where John and I spend a lot of time looking at neural networks, decision trees, robotics. So I have a little bit of a background in AI because of John. One of the things Dave Snowden says about AI, humans in the front, humans in the back. I think that's what you guys were talking about, right? So 100% autonomous vehicles or 100% autonomous anything, depending on the nature of the, you know, if you're gonna till the wrong row of corn, that's probably okay. If you're gonna kill somebody on the street or in the air, that's probably different, right? So anyways, I like the thinking of AI like that you need humans at the front, humans at the back. All I want to argue today, actually, I have a quote that I found, which I thought was pretty good. Most scientific fields of study haven't adopted a complexity framework or a complexity mindset yet. It's coming. There's a fair bit of literature now in the human factors field around complex adaptive systems, which is what I'm talking about, and how that influences the thinking around human factors. Most people who graduate from human factors, and you guys were a good case, I assume you guys don't study complex adaptive systems, but when you listen to people speak who come out of the human factors field, they already know most of that stuff and are applying good portions of it because of the nature of the training. There was something you said that struck me that I forgot, and I put it on my phone. But the main premise, and I don't want to get too much into the theory, but the main premise is that much of what we learned through Taylorism in the last 200 years of industrialization is methods and practices that are reductionist in nature. In other words, if we decompose a problem far enough, we're gonna figure it out. There are problems in our world that we're now understanding that we can't reduce to its constituent parts. They won't go back together. Daniel just mentioned the mechanic and the gardener. That's, I think, a good metaphor for thinking without getting into a long conversation about an adaptive practice. That's a good metaphor for thinking about how should I be working in this context? Should I be working as a mechanic? In other words, I have a machine where all the parts have a one-to-one relationship. I can take them all apart. I can work on this piece of it over there. I can work on, you know, if it's a car, the transmission over there, the motor over there, two different teams. They can work on them. They can put them back together. And when we start the car up, it works as good or better than it did before we took it apart. That's the reductionist view of the world. And that's the mechanic. The gardener, on the other hand, and we've got people who know about gardening here, so that's good. But if I have a tomato plant, I can't decide where the leaves are going to be or where the tomatoes are going to grow on the plant or how tall the plant is going to grow. I can take action to support the tomato plant. I can water it when it's dry, I can cover it when it's cold, but those are kind of oblique sort of activities. I have some control over how the tomato plant grows, but it's not like a mechanic. So you think to yourself the kind of things you work in, should I be more of a gardener here or should I be more of a mechanic, right? As the world gets more interconnected and a lot of it is, a lot of the complexity that we face is about technology in many senses of the word. More of our work will be about the gardening that we should do rather than the mechanic. I don't want to say a lot more about that. Maybe I'll just quote a colleague of mine in South Africa. I love this quote. She says, it's hard to live in the jungle when you're trained in the zoo. And I love that quote. And it's not a slight on faculty who are present here today. It's a broader statement about how we see our world and how we interact with it. Of course, it is also about how we're trained, but it's the natural tendency of humans to think in very ordered ways. The way our brain works, we're constantly trying to create order. It's an evolutionary principle, right? And so we have to think about how we would act in the jungle rather than in the zoo. I think I want to stop there.
Yeah. Well, it speaks to the fidelity in simulations, like how Darcy Jeremy talked about, well, the academic understanding of ergonomics was good, but what is the practical reality based on the needs of out there, right? And then bringing those matches together. Leslie,
yeah, and actually I was going to say, I think that's the thing again, I bring back the reality of it, and whether we like it or not, I think one of the things COVID has done for us, and even looking at some of the geopolitical environment we're in, is that the rate of change has increased and it's evenly distributed around the globe and it's becoming less predictable. And actually the one thing we have to do is start getting used to the fact that we're probably going to be switching between, to use a gardener and mechanic analogy, there are always new things emerging. We have to respond in the moment. So do we have all the building blocks around us to respond to some of these different things that are emerging as they come through? And I like that idea of mental models. I think that's something we talked about as well, Ray, is when there is chaos and complexity as humans and as human factors people, we like to create these mental models to make sense of our confusing place or to make sense of what we're doing. But then as you start to understand more, those mental models break down, you have to rebuild them. And so there's this we go through these moments of clarity, mental models, structures, frameworks through which we can live by, but we can't hold on to those forever. And this is this concept of polarities thinking, which I think is really important. And I hope some of the students get a chance to look into this concept. And the way you think about polarities is like breathing. When we're breathing in, there comes a point when you just can't breathe in anymore and it becomes detrimental to your health. You have to breathe out. And so it is detrimental staying in any one state for too long because you move into negative consequences. So this thing around, and I'm less about the frameworks and the academia behind it. I'm more around what I'm living every day in my job and at home. And I think there's something really important around creating these mental models to help us make sense, but being prepared and recognize when we have to rethink them or throw them away and move into a different space of the gardening, experimenting, testing, trialing to create these new models. And it's this constant shifting, I think, across these different states that we have to be. And with that, actually, which brings in the psychology side of things, is the real need, as much as we're scientists and engineers in the room, the real need to actually apply a lot of self-awareness. When you enter into a system, you are impacting that system. You need to be aware of what you're bringing to that system. So if you're collecting data, how might you interfering in that system or biasing through questioning, how might that impact the outcome? So I just threw a lot of stuff in there just to mix it up a bit.
You made me think of something, Leslie, because what I should have also said when we were talking about reductionism is, I'm not arguing you should throw away any tools. You understand? I'm not saying, if you hear somebody who's trying to sell you something and they say the whole world's complex, you have to change how you do things. just run away from them because they're just trying to sell you something. The reality is we understand ordered systems pretty well, and we have tools to deal with those. What we don't have, and I think what is emerging, are tools to deal and ways of thinking to deal with the really complex spaces that perhaps can't be dealt with by AI, at least not without human involvement. So there's a set of tools you have, and I would argue you might be missing a piece in your toolbox, and you need to pay attention to that. Start to think about generally, I think what's referred to as an adaptive practice.
So you're saying we should like keep the baby and throw the bathwater?
Keep the water too, I probably, that's what I would say. There was a question or comment. I think.
Question, I guess just from like a student perspective, we're asking on behalf of people still stuck in academia, what does this practically look like? Because in my mind, right, like the idea of gardening and going away from controlling everything, right? Like in research, we want to control all the aspects to make sure that we really know what we're asking and what we're testing, right? So I guess what does it look like practically to take on some of this gardening in research?
So again, there are. Oh no, go ahead. I was going to use you as an example. Leslie, go ahead.
I'm going to share. I can't see who said it. So good question. And I hope this helps in a very practical. And you said research. So
it was Christopher.
Christopher. Okay. Hi. So we do a lot of research when we're thinking about what we're designing for. And I think there's a really good example where we're designing a cardiac output monitor for it's for patients, but it was designed by a doctor and it has to be used by nurses. And, to experiment live, some of this thing to do research live and someone's going to die doesn't quite work. So there's a time and place, but to understand are we solving the right problems, we go into the live environments, we went into intensive care units to understand what's actually happening on the ground. Now to start asking a nurse or a doctor while they're operating on someone, hey, why did you do that? Isn't going to work. Then you take them out into probably some more of the simulated laboratory environments to then unpack some of that thinking, test it, trial it, and using a lot of our theories, and then you can go back into reality. I think it's recognizing when you need to switch between the two. I've got 3 degrees and so I think I love doing that because it gives me the time and space to reflect, pontificate, explore, try, improve my understanding of the world, and then apply those models, review them, refine them, and hopefully bring them back. So I think there's ways to look at how we apply academia and how we apply it and practice and how actually we test the two. And actually there should be more of a feedback loop between the two. If that answers your question.
That was a great practical example, I think, because I'll supplement that by throwing a couple of terms around, fancy terms that, I don't know, make me sound important, I guess. Because the way I interpreted your question is, so what is the practice? And that's the $1 million question, of course. So I'm glad, it would take a student to ask that, right? Because it doesn't sound like a very interesting question, but it actually is the question. What does an adaptive practice look like in a complex space? I think there's a couple of things that immediately come to mind in terms of the language that's used in that space. One is emergent. Again, I think we all have a basic understanding of what that term means from an ecological perspective, and that's how it's used in the complex space. But the challenge is, how do you create an emergent space? Because we are prone to convergence of ideas when we sit around a table and try to make a decision. Most of the time, the person who's paid the most in the room gets to decide which direction we're headed. And if I owned a company, I'd probably want it that way too. But the reality is that's not always, I would say maybe rarely even, a good way to develop strategy. So there's a practice around developing emergent spaces. Those are really painful to be in. I've been in them and I've led them. They're very painful because people want to decide, right? And they're saying, well, tell us what you want us to do, right? Creating emergence, but it's an uncomfortable space. I loved someone said comfortable being uncomfortable. That might have been you, Leslie. I wrote that down because that was what I was going to say. In technical terms, the language is premature convergence. That's that's exactly what that means. Okay, so we try to avoid that. Also, there's a great book by John Kay, who's an economist from the UK. It's called Obliquity. And this is about acting in complex spaces. Because in a complex space, sorry, when I say complex space, I'm talking about human complexity, human system complexity. So when I'm working in a space like that, I can't come at a problem head on because I'll fail. So how do you come at the problem obliquely? So think about all the strategies. Some of the students, I assume, don't have children, but think of all the strategies you use with your children to get them to bed or to get them to do something. I don't mean when you pay them, because sometimes you have to do that too, but those are oblique strategies. You're not telling them what you want them to do, but you're setting the conditions and the context for something to happen that will be beneficial, right? So that's a bit of the language added to what Leslie provided as a practical example. I hope that's helpful.
You should look at Otto Scharmer's work, ULab's Presencing Theory. It's a free MIT or edX course, and I've done it. It's fabulous, and it ties into human-centered design. I mean, ergonomics is actually human-centered design, and it touches on, I think, as researchers and psychologists, is creating that space to see what emerges. And in workplaces, actually, I can tell you this is something I've been trying really, really hard to do. And practically, with my team in Singapore, we just created this space where we'd literally just sit in a circle. And there's no agenda, no topics, and we would just see what's emerging, because we'd have one-to-one conversations, right? So if you think of the systems one-on-one, there'd be conversations, small groups, and topics would come up, but we needed it to be surfaced to the system, to the whole group, to then identify this is an issue, we need to address it. So one of the ways we did it was just this hour. And sometimes you'd sit for 45 minutes and no one would say anything until the last 10 minutes, someone says something. And it's probably one of the most powerful things I could have heard, or any of us could have heard around, my goodness, there's something here we need to really start looking at. But I think it's that is key. You've got to be really comfortable with silence, and you've got to have people with that comfort to be able to say, like, I don't have the answers. As a group, we have the answers, but I don't have the answers. I might be the most senior job title, but that doesn't mean I have all the answers. And it needs a lot of humility. And this is, I think, again, I touched on self-awareness, and I'm talking very much around in a business context, because that's where I'm spending so much time. And this real humility and self-awareness of when to keep your gob shut, your mouth shut, to sense the energy in a room, and to recognize when you need to let others just talk and you just sit and listen, and vice versa, but also when to raise your voice. I think one of the things that I have to spend a lot of my time is to raise those unheard voices, because those unheard voices are often key to understanding what's really happening within the system.
One of the greatest things that happened as a result of this exercise is Leslie and Michael and Daniel and I know Daniel already far too well, but we've had the chance to get together and talk and really just kick ideas around. And that's been really great. Leslie's been, it's been a lot of fun to meet you guys. So that's been a nice luxury that John has given us, I guess, on this day. I want to add one more thing. Leslie, you and I are going back and forth, and it's not necessarily fitting together as we thought it might, but that's okay, I think. I like Otto Scharmer's work too, and the theory U stuff. So if you're interested in starting somewhere, that's a good place to start. And there's others who we could certainly share with you. But in terms of an adaptive practice, the other really important thing, I think, and I guess this does fit, because Leslie, you were going into kind of a leadership conversation, right? And leadership is there's a huge piece here around leadership, because and I certainly saw it even in the late stages of my career with the government, is that the executive director or the person in charge feels that they have to have an answer, right? It's not that they want to have an answer. They feel like, oh my God, like I got to say something. Well, sometimes, as Leslie said, you just say nothing, and that's good leadership, right? But there's always this expectation in the system that, oh, I'm kind of in charge, so I think I need to make a decision here. No, you don't. Someone said it in your session about listening to the people at the interface where either the technology or where the work is taking place. That's essential in an adaptive strategy. But don't listen to the CEO. You listen to the people at the interface where you want to have the conversation. And so there's a whole practice around that too. You can, Dave Snowden's work around sense making, there's a whole piece to that. But Jack Welch, when he retired, I'm not a huge Jack Welch fan, just that up front in case people know his work, but he did a lot of interesting things, I think, and he had a lot to say about leadership. And when he was retiring, one of the things he said, so a reporter asked him, what's the one thing you'd say to young aspiring CEOs? And without even thinking, he said, always have someone outside of your chain of command who will tell you the truth. So just let that sink in. If you're running an organization or you're building an organization or you're thinking of it, there's lots of reasons why people share information, and there's lots of reasons why they withhold information. You can't conscript knowledge sharing. It has to be volunteered. That's the way to create a knowledge system in your organization.
But you can create the conditions within which people feel comfortable coming forward, right? Right. And I think about what John McCabe has given to a lot of us is, yeah, try, mess things up. You even said dissect them, reconstruct them. But I do believe you can create the conditions under which there's a greater probability of those conversations happening.
I would say that's the only way to do it.
Yes, correct.
Is to create the conditions. And that again is part of the oblique strategy. I don't go tell people how to act. I have to create the conditions within which how they act, the way in which I want them to act. And I manage those conditions to get a coherence, to get a beneficial coherence, to get something happening that I see as positive to the benefit of the company or the network or organization or whatever. Setting the conditions is rather than taking a mechanistic view or deterministic view, is how you work in those spaces where people are involved, where culture is involved, where knowledge sharing is involved. That was a piece, actually, Leslie, you led in very nicely, because I wanted to add something to this idea of adaptive action. And it's this idea of coherence. This is a really, really important point. People continue to think that the way to run an organization is through consensus. And actually that is not always very helpful. And again, in complex domains, it might hurt you. So you're looking for coherence. And I want to try to explain that. I'm not going to do a very good job of it, but you understand what consensus is. Do you understand what I mean by coherence? Does that make sense? Maybe I don't even have to explain it. Go on. Okay. Well, coherence is when something makes sense, not whether you agree with it or not, but that the conditions that you set out make sense to everybody. And I can say, I get it. I don't agree with it. Okay, does it make sense? Yeah, it makes sense. Here's why I don't agree. Okay. So you're getting to a coherence. You're not getting to consensus. You're not trying to get everybody in the room on the same page. Those are all bad strategies in complex domains. Okay, so coherence is another really important word around adaptive action and adaptive strategy. Okay.
Yeah. Let's anybody online here that I see a lot of familiar faces, which is really cool. How do we do to this, Chris? Is there like a hands up or something like that, or just fire it in the chat? Yeah, unmute yourself. Like, what's landing here? Like, what kind of questions are coming to mind, or what's sparking? I know there's some thoughts. I'll count to 3. Everybody jumping together. Yeah. 1. Or like, or, yeah, or the complexity, your own kind of complexity context. You got some?
Jerry, are you there, Jerry Singleton? Come in, Jerry Singleton.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm watching you, Ray.
Can I just tell a Jerry Singleton story?
Absolutely.
So this is you
can say, I don't know.
Put him on mute first. You talk about, I loved your story, and you talk about life-changing events. And I wasn't going to tell this because I didn't think Jerry would be here. I was walking across the field, soccer field. I was coaching men's soccer while I was doing my thesis, which is why it took me so long. But I was walking across the field one day in the middle of January. You know, in the old days, the grass field, there would be paths worn in the field, right? And it's freezing. And it's got to be like -20 and wind blowing across the field. I'm trying to get from life science to stairs, and he's going this way. And so I'm planning to just cross him where we're intersecting and say, "Hi, Jerry, keep moving." And so I'm walking. I said, "Hi, Jerry." And he says, Ray, hang on a second. I'm thinking, what? Hang on a second. I got something for you. And he's got that big brown bag, and he starts rifling through it. And I'm like, "Jerry, man, I got to get to the stairs house." Anyways, he pulls out this for me, hands it to me. He said, "Here, this will be perfect for you." I don't know if you remember this story, Jerry. I was at the time just finished up my training with, this is a complexity story. I just finished my training with the United States Soccer Federation, and I was going back down there to coach. Perfect timing in terms of the game in the US. Jerry handed me this job with the provincial government, and my wife, who a lot of people here know, who was at the Dalplex for 32 years or so, her and I chatted, and I said, if I could apply for this job, it was a research position in the government, work there for a couple of years, and then continue on my way, make a bit of money, and then go down to the US. We said, yeah, okay, let's do that. And I applied, got the job, and that was about 30 years ago. Anyways, I wanted to share that. Sorry, we're getting way off track here, but if you know Jerry, that's a good story.
Jerry, the floor is yours if you want to or share something else.
Well, I think John was with you too, when you were coming across the field. And I passed it to you, and all of a sudden, and then I scurried away, and I think John was saying, it's like, "What did he give you?" It's like it was a bomb or something like that. So yeah, but it was.
I didn't mean this to be old home week. Apologize for that, but I wanted to share that because that for the students, you will have these crossroads in your life that you don't notice, and 20 years from now, when you look back, you'll say, "Wow, that was big." Defining moments, absolutely. Sorry, Leslie's on there too. Wanted to add something.
I was actually enjoying listening to the story.
John Cozy has a thought.
You're sitting. Hold an opportunity that you're sort of listening, but don't lose track of it. Next week, if you have a question, find out how to contact. It is the combination of people who are ahead of you in their careers and your questions that help you better define your question, but also help you leapfrog over other people who are trying to get to some of those careers. So don't be shy. Don't be afraid to reach out, knock on a door, and I think what you'll find is most of your faculty members are pretty open door people. And that's one of the things that John told us. But you should also be seeing that any one of these people more than willing to, set up an appointment or meet with you sometime and have a chat about it. You might have a great idea, or sometimes it's not too bad to hear, yeah, I don't think I would do that one just yet. But keep it in your back pocket.
Yeah, I think we can facilitate that even just circulating the list of folks and spread it through LinkedIn, like if you want to connect with folks, right? Or I don't know the answer to that. I don't really have a lot of experience, but you should talk to this person.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of neat because there's that quote of who you are now, we once were, who we are, you will be. I don't know if that turns you off or turns you on. That's a good thing or a bad thing.
That's scary.
It is scary. But there's something neat to that. But I think things are blending a lot more. It's again that integrated model because the world, if you heard about that, VUCA world or like the volatility, the pace of change and the significance of change is ever increasing, right? The hyper-connectedness, the uncertainty of it all, where patterns are not easily discernible, right? Or at all. Or if you think you see a pattern, is it? The C is in that complexity space of what Ray's talking about. In that ambiguity, you can have multiple interpretations that have equal validity by different people. So it's, well, what is it then? Right? John, that speaks to the coherence, I think. So we give it a little bit of time for folks online. There's got to be a question or comment now. Jerry kind of broke the ice on that one. We'll give you 10 seconds to raise something in the chat, and then we'll take it into the room here. Nice.
Daniel.
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Stephen.
Leslie, Stephen Jenkins here. Great to see you on screen. It's been way too long. Ray was talking about the government culture. I know you spent a long time in the corporate culture, I'll say. And I use the word culture on purpose because, you read culture trumps strategy. And I've discovered over my career that's absolutely true. Can you talk a little bit from your perspective of how you leverage culture and how important it's been to your success?
You just hit a huge chord. So I can share with you. I work for the company's called Foolproof. I've been in the UK for 18 years, Singapore for 3 years, and I've been back in Canada for 2 months. I have to say it's great to be back. I can say Foolproof started out very much as a design agency. So if you think of the corporate culture around design and creativity and a lot of things we're talking about, and Ray talked about around, we need to challenge each other. We can't all agree on everything. Otherwise you're static and you actually go backwards. You're not moving forwards. And then we've been bought, and we're 5 years into an integration where we were bought by a big IT systems integrator out of India. And so we've got geographical culture, we've got design against tech culture and how that comes together. I'm telling you, I'm living complexity day in, day out. And I can say culture does eat strategy. And I'm also a strategist. So the work we're doing, I think you need, how do I say this? We need a strategy. So to Ray's point around, we still need to make sure we're aligned on the direction we're going in and the outcomes we're trying to achieve. So when I work with teams, I'm not going to tell them how to do it. We're going to make sure, yes, that's where we want to get to. And these are the outcomes. So you need to measure, right? This thing around testing and measuring is very important. But you're not going to get there if you don't have the culture that enables your team to make good decisions for themselves and move forward. We talk about complexity and scaling and growing. You are not going to be able to grow and scale and work at velocity, which is all the language the world's using right now, without the culture that enables it. And I'm living that right now. So I think from my experience in the corporate world, a lot of the work I'm doing is actually not just for clients, but internally for our own organization, helping think about what are the core values and behaviors by which we need our teams to live by in order to move forward. And I think why I've ended up less in pure human-centered design where I started and more around doing a lot of work in culture is because I think what human factors brings, and you can see it in the list of things John McCabe did, is we actually have a strong foundation. If you think of a house, we've all got a lot of bricks when we study human factors, and all those bricks are really needed. And I think what I learned in DAL is very much around, you can't be a single brick, you need other bricks working with you as well. So we've got a strong foundation in terms of skill sets, capabilities, perspectives. And we've got, I think, great values around collaborating, growth mindset, being curious. And that's part of that culture. And if you don't have that culture, you'll never grow, no matter how great your strategy is. I could go on for hours on what I've learned, but I hope I've sort of touched on enough of a surface level of really seeing how you do need the right culture with the right strategy. Otherwise, you can't execute on the strategy.
I want to add something to that. Thanks, Leslie. That's nice.
That's nice.
Question.
I don't agree with you. That's nice.
I thought it was nice.
Oh, good. Okay.
My use of adjectives at 4:30 on a Friday gets pretty weak. But I thought it was really good.
Thank you. And from a cultural point of view, in different parts of the world, that means something different. So that was a good example.
Hey, Leslie, knowing Ray for about 7 years, that's as good as it gets.
Great. Thank you. I take it. Thank you.
Fair enough. Now I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm kidding. Culture is the ultimate complexity problem. People call you and say, we can help you change your culture. That's bullshit. It's total bullshit. Nobody can change your culture except for you. And you can't change it in the way that you think. You can't change it like a mechanic. You have to change it with an adaptive strategy, right?
Yes.
So I don't want to, I mean, that's a whole, we're going off in a whole other direction and it's late in the day. But I'll just say that. I'll say this about that and leave it there. But it is the ultimate
It is.
problem for organizations. And again, I think that what is now being called anthro-complexity, that's providing a lot of material for thinking about how you develop a culture in your organization that is not maladaptive, because most of them are.
So what do you think in the room here? You know, any things that are jumping out or want to share? Curious when, from a student perspective or current student, because we're all students. I mean, it's not to single anybody out here, but how do you kind of make sense of complexity with your own projects? You know, is that a conscious kind of decision point that you're trying to understand or build in or represent?
To jump in from personal experience, we were having meetings just the other day on the complexity of this. At what point do you throw in complexity too? Like you can't build a project right off the bat with all the details that you want in it. As much as we want to go for a real world simulation, everything be exactly the same, and then just control for all those things. It's not always feasible, right? It's too many things too, right? You want to pick the things that you're either more interested in or just dice down the problem into something that's a little bit simpler and just get a piece of whatever, going back to this garden stuff, a piece of whatever's happening in the garden, right? Like understanding like potentially like why a leaf grew in that spot instead of manipulating the leaf itself and forcing it to grow somewhere else. So
Do you want me to say something about that?
Nothing, just building on your analogy.
I mean, Buzz Halling, who's a famous Canadian ecologist, developed a thing called the panarchy cycle. I think it's worth looking at when you're thinking about about how you develop a project that is quite complex. But he's missing some parts. Part of it is human consciousness, which he's building a model around ecology, which has nothing to do with human consciousness. Human consciousness creates an infinite level of complexity compared to ecology. So when the ecologists tell you that they've got complexity sorted out, that's bullshit, right? Because human consciousness creates a layer of complexity beyond ecology that is way beyond that. Geez, I was going to say something about that.
I can only imagine, like people who are interested in like decision-making things too, and like how humans are going to react to things. And I had a little bit of that in my undergrad, and I don't understand how anyone wraps their head around it to like really plan out like what people are going to do, because they're just like, the complexity of the human is too vast, right? There's so many things that someone could do, or things in their history, who they are as a person, just life experiences that
How they're feeling that day.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people here filled out employee surveys, right? I mean, again, employee surveys are largely a waste of time in my experience. But if we talk in the complexity language, if I want to ask people, and I was responsible for one at one time, if I want to ask people about their experience in my organization, and I want to use a survey to do it, I will ask them only about things in ordered domains, ordered where there's causality, where I can measure that. I don't ask them about stuff that's in the complex domain. It doesn't make any sense. And you look at these employee surveys, they're all over the map, and they think they can tell you how that works.
But we improved our performance by 2%.
Exactly. And so there's that garbage too, in terms of how metrics are used, right? Goodhart's law, you should look that up. He's an economist from Margaret Thatcher's days. And his law's been restated a number of times, but from a measurement perspective, I really like what he says. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a measure.
Yeah.
Right? As soon as you have a measure and you want to measure Jen by it, it's not going to measure anything anymore because she's not game it.
Can I share something funny? This is something I haven't. So the powers that be in my parent company have decided we're going to do this happiness index. And there's a lot of good behind it, but how they implement it is everyone in the organization has a target that impacts their salary, and it's on the happiness score. So, and I just say, like, and I've been fighting with the parent company's chief HR officer going, do you understand how ironic this is? You're asking me to measure my team on happiness, but and this is where I get frustrated. But if you bring it down to just the basic sort of what we can touch and feel, the tangible, and this is how I'm trying to bring in or shift culture. One of the things I do in meetings where I know we have to do some different conversations, particularly when we're a group who are trying to unpack some tough conversations. At the beginning of the meeting, I say, okay, guys, give me your thumbs. And you can see it in one of the talks I do, and this does work. I want us all to sort of share what we're bringing to this meeting today. Good, however you want to define it, neutral or down. And just by doing that, we can do it now. Everyone, where are you right now? And you very quickly start to sense where the energy is and how that may or may not be impacting it. Forces people to go, oh my gosh, everyone's up here, I'm down here. Just that alone helps to sort of shift and understand, whoa, if I'm up here and everyone's down, you can see I'm passionate, I drink a lot of coffee, I get excited. Wow, that's not going to help this conversation. So there are things I think you can do to start bringing some of that to the fore. And that's why I harp on a lot about really helping people be a bit more self-aware in my teams.
And the student presentation around trust, right? I mean, that struck me when we were talking about that, because trust is such a huge part of culture. People want a happy culture, but they actually don't create trust in their organization. Again, it's not rocket science, right? The two things go together. So.
Okay, so Mike Hartley is standing fairly ominously, just looming in front of Fiona as well. So I respect that. So I think just one quick point there: humans are not limited to one identity, right? So this whole idea of being able to predict in any one time, context always matters. And the other bit is humans are not limited to acting in accordance with predetermined rules, right? So it kind of speaks to that. We want order. That's how we process. Au contraire. Yeah. Mike. I think that's up for us. Leslie, thank you. Right?
Thank you, everyone.
It was a lot of fun. We'll talk.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to say, I have not heard the happiness index in quite some time. So everyone better bloody like that one.
Bring up the survey.
Yeah. Trust me, if your pay relies on it,
everybody's gonna be happy.
I'm real happy.
And thanks for a Brent Goodhart's thought. I love that. Yeah, when a metric becomes a target, it ceases to become a useful metric.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Hey, this has been an excellent day. And I just want to acknowledge, first of all, Heather and your students. Ben, Sarah, Jackie, that ability to pitch ideas in 3 minutes is going to serve you very, very well. Ask Shay, ask Kyle, right? For those of us who are in heavier industries, more traditional industries, we are subjected to comatose-inducing presentations on the regular, like 45, 55 minutes of somebody walking through a dense slide deck. And then they have the audacity to ask, well, do we have any questions? No, of course not. I just want this to end. So your ability to really refine that and be able to repeatedly pitch your ideas is going to serve you very, very well. So I thought that was a great job. And Heather, great job on leading that session. I don't want to try and summarize this because I think it's unfair for one person to try and do it. And if I thought about trying to summarize it, I would take notes throughout the day. But I think for me, a couple words come to mind around capacity. From a human standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, from a system standpoint, and how we have the capacity to handle variability, I think is one thing I'm going to walk away with. Students, yourselves, what did you take away?
Nothing like putting them on the spot.
Yeah. There are no wrong answers.
Yeah, no, exactly.
No, anything you want to throw out?
My big takeaway is I'm amazed by how many connections that I guess just I didn't know existed, and that like all of you guys are here, and I feel like I don't know, a lot of the time when I'm working in the basement of the Dopplex, I'm like, it's just me down here. So it's really nice to see, I guess, that like, there is a community around all of this, the common interest of all this.
We've been stuck in that dungeon.
Yeah, there's an exit to it.
Anything else?
Yeah, I guess
Chelsea?
I'm not a student anymore, but I guess just the integration part of everything, right? Every single aspect, even just the students that are here are studying such different things. But you know, we're all coming from a similar background, and you can go literally anywhere, right? You're integrating all of these similar concepts into all of these different environments. You know, like Shay was saying, you know, you're interested in academia for a while, and then you're suddenly not, and then there's other paths out there, right? With all of these connections, there's just so much integration and so much possibility.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I actually, there's a couple points I didn't mention. Just one housekeeping item. We have there's been a bursary set up by the university in honor of John McCabe. So there's an opportunity for those who wish to contribute to that. I wanted to mention at the beginning, I forgot to. We'll send out some information as a follow-up on this. But I'd like to invite Heather up. Heather, do we have we do? Okay, brilliant. Come on up.
All right. So we had our panelists judge the student research pitch competition. And I would say it was, you know, this is something, again, probably learned about decision making from John, is decisions are really difficult when there's like no good answer, but also when all the answers are very good. And was a very difficult decision. I think everybody's name showed up at least once in everybody's top 2 rankings. So this was one of those ones we actually had to go to coherence rather than consensus, because nobody could decide which one could come out of the top, but there was somebody that kind of consistently came through, and I think it makes a lot of sense because it's a really, really strong pitch, really knows her stuff, and so Sierra. And the printer ran out of ink, so I will, once we order new ink, there'll be a nice presentation, so I apologize for that, but just one more round.
We're wrapping up, but now we're gonna get emotional. Okay. Yeah, seeing John here. Cool. All right. We try this again. Heather, there's something I want to mention. We talked about the past, present, and future, and you get to represent both the present and the future, and yeah, the future's in really good hands. And just to work off John Cozy's comment, please reach out to us. Absolutely use the connections that are here, that are available, because we are a family in many respects, and the family is growing, the family is changing, is looking different, which is amazing. And yeah, the torch is yours, and I know it's in good hands. So yeah, thanks. I don't think there's anything left to say. If there is, Ray will probably say it. But I know that people need to get home, may need to get home. I think that we're hoping that there's going to be some form of little reception back here. So feel free to stick around. Feel free to, obviously, if you need to get home, to batten down the hatches. We appreciate that. But yeah, we're around. And thank you very much for being. Thank you everyone for being here. And Tim, Sean, this is a great chance to honor your dad. Thanks.
Right.